It's almost time for rotation, and we now know the new incumbent set for the fall 2025 rotation, also known as Revolution Season 14. Next month, we bid farewell to Theros Age of Tracks, designed by Zangi, and say hello to Exalts of Twiltrie, also designed by Zangi. You just can't keep this curator down, I guess. We've got 303 cards coming in this set, with roughly 80% of them lined up for at least some discussion over the next however many hours this review runs for. It's somewhere in the range of 240 to 250 cards, so please pray for my vocal cords. With so much ground to cover, we're going to hop right in. So as always, links to the custom Magic Discord server and relevant resources are in the description below, including links to the LackeyBot and Escape from Limbo search engines tuned to show all the new cards from this set. Unlike last time, with this being a single set rotation, I don't feel it urgently necessary to split this up into multiple parts, which means things are going to run pretty long here. We're gonna follow the same structure as last review, though, starting with mechanics, then new lands, and then breaking things down in color order. One important thing to note about Exalt of Twiltrie before we go too deep is that this set was built on a similar framework to Kitsuo Dusk of Time from last rotation, specifically filling the void left by 5 absent color pairings of that set. So when we get to multicolor cards, we'll break them down into blue-black, green-white, blue-red, black-green, and finally red-white, with no multicolor cards existing outside of those pairings. Some final things to note before we begin. As always, every design we see here is subject to change. It's already been stated publicly that some elements of the set's themes are likely to necessitate adjusting to the format's interaction suite to deal with a largely uncontested card type, so while I'll be doing my best to cover everything I think is worth consideration, I may miss a few cards and there may be notable interactions that I just don't cover or will get addressed in the rotation patch. So whatever ends up getting changed, keep your eyes peeled for September 1st when the rotation patch video will be arriving. Hopefully. Additionally, you all may need to bear with me here. This is a crazy daunting task I have ahead of myself. As always remains the case, I don't have an editing software that I can run on my computer without causing some issues, so this video is all in one take. I may have some verbal flubs, I may stumble over my words, I may go off script. I'll do what I can with the intense amount of card discussion we have ahead of us to make sure everything is easily navigable with timestamps for every section. I have to put a break between the black and red cards for my own well-being, but it's just going to be a brief moment where I'm going to pause the recording so you won't have to wait a minute. Maybe a minute while I explain that there's the break slide. So please bear with me as I work my way through the massive catalog we have to cover. Without further ado, let's dive into the review. Kicking off the mechanical suite of Exalt of Twiltrie, let's talk about the big elephant in the room, which is Revolution getting battles for the very first time. These battles have the subtype Operation, and function similarly to something like the class enchantments we've seen in the past in both Revolution and Official Magic. Like battles in the official game, operations enter being protected by an opponent of your choice with the number of defense counters on them equal to the number on the bottom right of the card. Though an important distinction here is that unlike the battles we saw in March of the Machines, these operations stick around after they've been defeated. As they lose defense counters, the operations gradually unlock new abilities up to the point where they're defeated. You can attack them instead of your opponent or an opposing planeswalker, and the protecting opponent can block to keep you from defeating them. Each color has 4 operations, with 2 at uncommon, that only unlock abilities upon being defeated, and 1 each at rare and mythic, that have benchmarks when you're partway towards defeating them. One important disclaimer before we move on, battles are a card type that there isn't much counterplay to in the format right now, especially since no one accounted for battles that would stick around once being defeated. So curators have mentioned that this is on their radar as something they're planning to add more interaction for. So we'll avoid talking about these as being on the board forever, but it is still worth noting that these are a fair bit trickier to pull off the board than an artifact or enchantment, meaning that they do look a lot better when compared to those permanent types. Though, again, we'll see in the rotation patch how anti-battle tools shape up to address this. Our first color pair mechanic comes with an important note as we dive in here. This set also has some kindred themes, with each color pairing caring about a pair of creature types. For blue and black, those are warlocks and horrors, who come with the chant mechanic. Chant is an addendum you can apply to your instant and sorcery cards as you cast them by exiling a card with chant from your hand and paying its chant cost. From there, the bracketed text on the chant card is added on to the instant or sorcery, much like Splice from older official Magic, meaning if you copy that spell, the copy will have the bracketed text added on, and the bracketed text will only really apply in terms of its effect as the spell resolves. Afterwards, you'll be able to cast a chanted card from exile if it were still a card in your hand, even if the spell you chant it onto doesn't resolve. There are 13 cards with chant abilities, and all of them are creatures. Up next is green and white, which care about angels and soldiers while bringing in Reprieve. Reprieve modifies how a card enters the battlefield by allowing you to bounce a creature you control without Reprieve to its owner's hand as it enters, usually providing you some clear benefit for doing so. It's important to note that this isn't a triggered ability and it doesn't target, so if you want to stop Reprieve, you'll have to respond while the spell is still on the stack. Reprieve is found on 12 cards across 11 creatures and 1 enchantment. Blue and red care about fairies and illusions, while bringing them the decoy mechanic. Decoy is an attack trigger, causing you to create a 1/1 tapped and attacking illusion token copy of the creature with decoy, exiling that token at the end of the turn. The token will only be an illusion, shedding all other creature types, but will retain all other characteristics of the card, including name, color, casting cost, and most importantly, abilities. There are 14 cards with decoy, all of them being not only creatures, but all specifically being fairies. Black and green care about zombies and spirits, and bring with them the Vigor ability word. Vigor is a flag noting that an ability has a rider requiring you to have had your life total change in the turn for that ability to function. Life gain and loss of life work here in equal measure, so there are plenty of solid, aggressive, and slower synergies to be had. There are 14 cards with Vigor abilities across 9 creatures, 2 each of instants and sorceries, and 1 additional creature that uses it as a clause to become a planeswalker. Last up is red and white, which care about berserkers and clerics and bring the Rapture keyword. Rapture is a death trigger, returning the raptured creature back to the battlefield when it dies, though the returned creature comes back with a haze counter. This helps to keep track of the fact that the rapture creature loses their abilities when this happens and can no longer block. If they leave play from there, they'll regain these abilities if you exile them, say, but it'll require hoops for you to jump through to actually make that happen. It's worth noting that as a death trigger, if the rapture creature has a finality counter or otherwise is prevented from going to your graveyard, it will not be able to return with a haze counter or the ability to no longer block. Rapture is found across 16 cards with 15 creatures and a single instant that grants it for the turn. Moving on to lands, we have 2 cycles of mirrored check lands, with each color pair getting a rare and uncommon that tap for one of the 2 colors, and enter tapped while looking for a land of the opposite basic land type. They also all come with an activated ability that requires at least 2 mana of the other color to activate. The rares all animate into creatures for the turn, while the uncommons sacrifice for their ability. Let's start out with the blue-black pair in Chasm of the Silent Covenant and Sanctum of Bleeding Bark. Chasm taps for black and checks for islands to come in untapped, allowing you to pay 2 and double blue to animate it as a 4/4 black horror creature with vigilance for the turn. Sanctum, meanwhile, has mirrored mana and enter clauses, and can be tapped and sacrificed for 2 and double black to put 1 card from the top 5 cards of your deck into your hand before putting the rest to the bottom. I'm not 100% sure Sanctum of Bleeding Bark is worth shedding basics for in these colors, as the ability is pretty high cost for a single card out of the deck, but I'm a big fan of Chasm of the Silent Covenant. A 4/4 creature is a meaningful clock for a mid-range control-oriented strategy, and as we've seen with the now soon parting 100-handed pillars, Vigilance can do a lot of good work on a creature land. Up next is Fort Ravelon and Hall of the Gentle Light in green and white. Fort Ravelon is the white land, animating for 1 and double green as a 3/3 green and white soldier that makes a 1/1 soldier when it attacks, while Hall of the Gentle Light can be tapped and sacrificed for 1 and double white to put a pair of +1/+1 counters on a creature you control as a sorcery, giving it vigilance and trample for the turn. I'm not overwhelmingly confident in Hall of the Gentle Light, and I'm a little more optimistic about Fort Ravelon, but I think these can both be decent if you're willing to split the difference between a couple of these and a fair few basics to make sure they actually enter untapped. Worth keeping in mind for all 10 of these is that we do have typed dual lands, but those lands always enter tapped, so unless you can be certain you'll get the relevant basics out first, these lands will sometimes feel a bit slower than just basics. And of course, Fort Ravelon would look a lot better if the token was made tapped and attacking, but it's not, so In blue and red, we have Glimmervale Lake and Lorespire Bluff. Lake taps for blue and lets you pay 1 in double red to have it become a copy of target creature you control, becoming an illusion of that creature until end of turn. Bluff, meanwhile, is the simplest of the uncommons, just taking 3 in double blue to tap and sacrifice for 2 card draws. This is probably the most polarized split in terms of my reaction, because I think both could be solid, but Glimmervale Lake is the one that really excites me. It has the highest floor among these rare lands, as it's the only one that can't already be a creature if your board is empty. So you need to have something to target. So very high floor, but the ceiling can also be incredibly high, because if you can get this to resolve, there are a lot of spicy creatures in the field that are great to swing with extra copies of, or even just have an extra instance of their abilities around. Keep in mind that Lake sheds its abilities when it copies something, so if you really need it to tap for blue, tap it for blue to activate its ability. Bluff, meanwhile, I have a lot less to say about. It's functionally drawing 2 cards for 6 mana. It's really far from amazing, but I could see some blue and red decks feeling so desperate for a bit of utility in the mana base that they're willing to give this a shot for when they flood out. Black and green bring Gallows Sprout Timber and Crownfall Archive. Timber's the green land, animating as a 3/3 black and green Dryad Spirit for 1 and double black, and allowing you to exile a card from a graveyard and gain 2 life whenever it attacks. Archive, meanwhile, taps for black and can be tapped and sacrificed for 2 and double green to regrow a card from your graveyard. These both seem like pretty reliable utility lands. Timber's graveyard hate and life gain can let it meaningfully engage with a few finicky strategies in the field without having to dedicate main deck slots to graveyard interaction. And Archive is just reasonable, if a little overcosted, recursion. But sometimes that's what you get when you want it on a land that can come into play untapped. Finally, in red and white, we have Crucible of Bound Flame and Throne Hall of Reckoning. Crucible taps for red, animating as a 2/2 red and white cleric for 1 and double white, giving your other creatures +1 power for the turn when it attacks. Throne Hall is the white land, tapping and sacrificing for 2 and double red to make a pair of 1/1 red Berserker tokens. These both seem fine in aggressive decks, so I think of all of 10 of these lands, Throne Hall has the most potential in a deck that already would want this in the mostly rotation-proof Naya Tokens deck that we've seen Cat and Tree iterating upon over the last several months. And they just brought it to a second-place finish in July's Grand Prix. We've got 2 other lands to talk about here, starting with the more unknown quantity option. Crumbling Ruin is a new addition to the anti-non-basic land club, tapping for colorless and allowing you to tap it and pay 2 to have it and a non-basic land you don't control both shed all of their abilities in place of becoming lands that tap for mana of any color. I'm of 2 minds here. Time-Worn Crags and Wasted Watchpost removing the land they want to fight can be really good, but we're increasingly entering an era of a lot of land recursion from graveyards in the format. From Unflinching Titan to Aurora to Jack to Dormant Camel, and from Mystic Returns to Techian Pledge. And that's having not discussed any new cards from this set that play into those roles. While that initially seems like a great thing for Crags and Watchpost, the reality is that it also means that the things they're removing just come back to play more often. As a result, Crumbling Ruin removing the text from a non-basic is more likely to permanently remove its utility mode, which seems great. The only apprehension I have here is that Crags and Watchpost also function as mana denial, especially when used repeatedly, while Crumbling Ruin actually fixes your opponent's mana, helping them hit splash costs or cast more color restrictive spells. That being said, this can also be a boon, because once it's used up, it becomes a rainbow land for you as well, meaning it can actually be a pretty safe utility land to include in very color-dense decks, provided you don't just fall apart against an opposing monocolored deck on only basic lands. I can't say with certainty that this will make waves, but with Crags and Watchpost both slated to rotate on New Year's Day in just 4 months, there's time for Crumbling Ruin to put in some work. Finally, we have a very simple land to end on. Gilded Court is returning to the format, having rotated out exactly a year ago with Blood Like Rivers in the September 2024 patch. Court's a pretty reliable piece of mana fixing if you're taking things a bit slower, as while it only starts out as a colorless land, you can forego using it for mana in a turn to give it a basic land type permanently. This is not only great with a lot of the colorless tools we've seen in Cyberos, which only had 4 months to use this card previously, but we've also gotten a lot of lands type matter support in the rotations since. From the Kitsuo rares that count up lands of a particular type, like Damned to Hell and Welkin Eviction, to the Chikyu Chaos Reigns and Cliques of Nile and mana fixing lands, and even some of the new lands in this set, there's a wide range of reasons to care about specific land types right now, so I'm very glad to see this one come back. I think it'll be best with either the new Czech lands or the ones from Chikyu Chaos Reigns, since it makes those more reliable, but I could see it being used with any of these tools. It makes colorless costs easier to pay in mono black control, for instance, if you're playing Damned to Hell. Kicking off the white cards is Softlight Harmonist, a 1-mana 1/1 Angel Bard with Flying and Reprieve, as well as an enter trigger to put a +1/+1 counter on a creature you control if it reprieved a creature. While this isn't quite the bomb synergy card that Nurturing Pixie is in official standard, since this only picks up creatures, Harmonist being able to put its counter anywhere rather than just on itself is a great way to amplify the damage you're dealing in a turn while rebuying a value tool. I can think of 2 solid homes for this in specific, at least as far as things that are already established, both being decks that are looking to squeeze this card into a blue strategy. White-blue ninjas put up some decent results over the last couple months in the hands of this set's designer, and this being an annoying evasive creature that can pick up your small enter trigger value tools like Veiled Branch Stalker and Architect of the Intangible while buffing your ninjas and then swinging uncontested in the air to tee up a new ninjutsu cost seems like really great synergy. The other, slower alternative is slotting this into Golems, as it can be used both to get repeat enter triggers from your Herald of Awakenings and Unspeaking Titans, as well as, importantly, buff your Unspeaking Titans out of range of -3/-3 or 3 damage targeted removal and exile effects, and Wraths. And that's just what Harmonists can do with blue cards. This thing's got a lot of potential, and we'll get into why I think this card could be really crazy later down the line. Another 1-drop to throw into the ring is Blessed Line Warden, another 1/1 for 1. Though this one's a human soldier that gives your other soldiers +1 attack, and your angels ward 1. While I don't think that angel buff is likely to be particularly relevant, the +1/+0 to all soldiers is pretty great when we've got some potent soldier-making cards in Cliques of Nile and Cyberos, from Sparks of Revolution to Flags on High, and Lost Resistor to Ardor Forefront of Freedom. We've got some very strong tools to push you wide and take advantage of this static anthem. And of course, any additional soldiers in this set also benefit. Sigil of the Last Light's a funky 1-mana enchantment, building up +1/+1 counters as you have creatures enter, and then being able to accrue one of either a Flying, First Strike, Lifelink, or Vigilance counter when it happens twice in a turn, and either a Double Strike or Indestructible counter if you can make it trigger 6 times in a turn. From there, the point of it all is that you can then pay 1 and a white to animate it as a 0/0 angel with all of those counters. I think you can take this in one of 2 primary directions. The better one is using it as additional pseudo-copies of Kitsune Matriarch, trading off the immediacy and cost-effectiveness of the Fox Noble for a more resilient body that dodges sorcery speed removal and actually benefits from having multiple tokens made in a single shot. You can also do it as a weird new tool with Plush Collection, as you can activate its animation ability even when it's already a creature, to have Plush Collection make a copy of it. But notably, Plush Collection doesn't preserve the fact that it's a creature, so this won't build up your animated sigil or any of the new ones you make, so probably not very good, but always worth a shot. Unyielding Conviction joins the suite of instant speed white flickers in the field, exiling a creature you control before putting it back into play and allowing it to come in tapped and attacking if it was already swinging in. I think a lot of the other white flickers in this field are probably better than their play rate suggests, and we've seen recently how good flickers in blue can be with rebuying key enter triggers, though that's in part because Soul Space Refit can blink subroutines. I think Conviction gets some points here, though, for being the cheapest white flicker we have, and also because it's seemingly a way to turn a blocked creature into an unblocked one, since having the creature come in tapped and attacking after blockers are declared makes it so it just punches in undeterred by the opposing board state. This is a solid slip-through trick in a color that normally doesn't get it. Dawn Ward Minister's a simple, neat alternative to a card we just got a couple months ago. It's a 2-mana 1/1 cleric that draws a card when it enters, additionally gaining you 2 life if you cast 2 or more spells in the turn. I was optimistic about Male Daemon, and while that hasn't really panned out so far, Dawnward Minister solves the Daemon's biggest problems in providing a degree of immediacy both to the card draw and the potential life total padding. Henda Ravelon is a 3/2 legendary human soldier with vigilance for 1 and a white, and whenever you cast your second spell in a turn, it becomes a 4/4 angel with flying that has all damage that would be dealt to it prevented for the turn. It's worth noting that the trigger scaling up those stats also sheds the human soldier types for the turn, so this may not be the best card for decks that care about soldiers, but there's a ton of upside to be had here. A 4/4 for 2 is stellar amounts of pressure in aggressive shells, especially when backed up by combat tricks like Momentous Charge that can both amplify the pressure and ensure you keep hitting that 2-spell count every turn. There are also slower flashback tools like Industrialize that can help keep this rolling, but I think Henda looks best in a red-white aggro list with things like Momentous Charge, Face of Animosity, and other cheap spells. Ephemia might not be leaving, or Ephemia may be leaving, but Heroic might not actually need heroic triggers to keep up the fight. We're going to skip ahead a bit in mana value here to bring a 4-drop into the conversation as we talk about Radiant Devotee and Aegis of Grace. Devotee is a 2/2 Nephilim soldier for 2 that gives your angel spells Soldier Convoke, meaning they can be convoked out but only by soldiers. From there, it has a trigger to untap all of your soldiers whenever one or more angels you control attack, allowing you to swing in with them and an angel they rushed out before untapping the soldiers to convoke out another angel in the second main phase. The only wrinkle here, seemingly, is that the current standard pool has a total of 7 angels, and few are so astonishing as to be worth the trouble here. What is worth the trouble is Aegis of Grace, a 4-mana 4/4 angel knight with flying and lifelink that prevents damage dealt to battles you protect while giving you, your battles, and other creatures hexproof. Devotee trivializes the effort required to put Aegis of Grace in play, allowing you to curve it out on turn 3 just by itself, and getting 2 copies of Aegis makes them practically untouchable in most situations. Also keep in mind that this set has other angels we'll get to later, and a particular strategy we'll get to all the way down towards the end of green that I think puts this to the most effective use. So keep Devotee and the Soldier Token Matters cards on your mind when we revisit them moving forward. Herald of the Radiant Banner is a particularly rude hate bear, coming down as a 2/2 elf cleric for 2, and taxing abilities of artifacts by requiring activations to have a tap an untapped artifact you control additional rider on those costs. That being said, that's far from why I want to talk about this card here. It's that second line of text that has my curiosity. At any time, you can exile 2 cards from your graveyard to have Herald become an enchantment until end of turn, preserving its text box but shedding its type line. This makes it able to slip past most targeted removal and board wipes with ease, provided you can keep it fueled, ensuring that it can keep swinging in or otherwise just annoying the opponent. The biggest appeal here, though, is that we've got a couple cards that care about this ability cost, such as Ayeshi's Agent making a flying bird token each time you activate this on your turn, Writhling draining the opponent for 1 life each turn, Arduous Miners making a bunch of treasure tokens, and Ever-Present Rot bouncing itself back to your hand to be replayed. I can't be certain any of these synergies will be enough to be deck-defining, especially with the Oldun cards on a 4-month timer to get used with Herald, but with this being a 2-drop you can find off of Ozon's Blessing, there's a lot of consistency here. Sanctified Attendant fills a similar role to a card we got last rotation in Illusory Savior, though I'll contend this one may do the job a little bit better at the cost of requiring more mana to do so. It's a 2/1 Elf Knight for 2, and you can pay 1 and sacrifice it to give another creature you control indestructible for the turn. From there, its Rapture ability will bring it back as a 2/1 that can't block and has no abilities. The upside here over Illusory Savior is clear. Protecting your creature leaves you with an additional 2/1 body that can only attack or tap its for abilities, whereas Savior vanishes for good and forces a finality counter on the creature you protect, so it won't get death triggers later on, even if it opens the door for the initial protection to let death triggers happen. We're getting multiple new Raise the Alarms in this set, folks. Resolute Reinforcements is a reprint from Official Magic, a 2-mana 1/1 human soldier with flash that makes another soldier when it enters. An Advance of the Sainted March is our first battle of the review. Advance starts off at 3 defense and makes a pair of red Berserker tokens when it enters, bringing with it a triggered ability upon being defeated to make you another 1/1 Berserker tapped and attacking whenever you swing in. Reinforcements has nice synergies with the Soldier Matter tools we have, but otherwise, I think Advance is a particularly big upgrade for something like the Naya or any other color combination tokens decks we'll see moving forward, as it serves as additional non-legendary copies of Freedom, the transformed side of Sparks of a Revolution, and makes tokens of a different color than itself to build up color count for Penwrath Agenda. It also helps that 3 defense is easily cleared if you curve Advance into EO, allowing one Berserker to defeat your battle as a 3-3 while the other hits your opponent for 3 in the face, and sets you up to make an additional 3-3 every turn thereafter. We also have another Anthem here in Sanctified Ravager. It's a 2-2 for 2 human Berserker that gives your other Berserkers and Clerics +1/+1, and can be exiled from your graveyard for 3 and a white as a sorcery to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. The number of Berserkers and Clerics we have prior to this set is really low, with the best ones being Jorgen and Ascended Seer, though some familiar faces in the Naya Tokens deck, like Penwrath Agenda and Ragtag Squad, can make creatures of the relevant types here. I think the Graveyard Clause is the most important thing here, allowing it to pump up your team after it's been removed, but I don't think that'll be enough to push it into playability on its own. If it does see play, I think that Graveyard ability is going to be what pushes it over the top, but I think it will require some serious work. Don't go thinking aggro's the only plan getting fun tools in white, though. Sanctum of Repression is a 2-mana enchantment with Reprieve that exiles a non-land permanent when it enters, either if its mana value is 3 or less, or if you reprieved a creature with it. Even without reprieving a creature, this picks off a lot of key problems kicking around right now, like Borrow and EO for less mana than something like Sealing Strike or Gone Pickin', while also having the upside to pick up some value-based creature in exchange for anything you could want. There's an error on this slide, by the way. Ayeshi's Agent, Rivaling, not supposed to be here. I forget what the first card is supposed to be, but I believe Inklight Dancer is supposed to be on here. I'm not going back to fix it, so look up what Inklight Dancer does on either the LackeyBot search engine or on Escape from Limbo. Those links are in the description. The lower mana cost here makes this a profoundly safe include in a lot of strategies, both fast and slow, so I think we'll be seeing a lot of Sanctum of Repression over the next 2 years. We've got a couple other interactive tools at 2 mana as well, with Break the Tide and Shatter the Sigil. Both are 2 mana instants, with Break the Tide stripping all abilities away from a tapped creature before dealing 4 damage to it, while Shatter the Sigil lets you choose between giving a creature +1/+0 and indestructible or blowing up an artifact or enchantment. These are both solid utility tools covering the 2 halves of the soon-to-rotate Walk the Dead's path, but having their own merits over it. I like both of these on their own merit, and I could see them both showing up in sideboards in small, and maybe even main decks in small quantities, especially as other removal options wax and wane in strength and popularity. We've arrived at the cards that were clearly designed for me specifically. Thorn and Trial and Too Late for Grace. Both are 2 mana sorcery speed spells that can return a creature with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to play, though Thorn and Trial does far more to carry its weight in the long term. Too Late for Grace is just a sorcery, returning the creature to play with a +1/+1 counter on it, while Thorn and Trial is a battle that comes in with 5 defense counters and rebuys a creature or planeswalker within the mana value bounds. From there, if it drops to 3 defense, it begins taxing your opponent's spells for 2 mana on your turn, and once defeated, you just make a 4/4 angel with flying. Between Deep Treader Arcanist, Demographer, Tireless Aspirant, Rooftop Slink, and Ignited Soul, we've got a lot of 1-mana creatures that can loot away a 3-drop for these to be online the following turn, with the best option almost definitely being Fabricated Anomaly, though Thorn and Trial can also recur Garen Returned Prophet if you pitch that instead. I've been wanting to make some sort of Grixis or Mardu looter deck work for a while now, and while I love my Scrapyard mechas, these cards might be the excuse I need to give blue a break and start making some big turn 2 swings. Moving up to 3 mana, we find another pair of Banishing Lights, each costing 1 and double white, and each with their own advantages, and one has disadvantages. Casus Belli is a legendary enchantment that exiles a creature or planeswalker until it leaves, passively antheming your creatures for an additional point of power while it sticks around. Advance of the Quiet Moon, meanwhile, is a 4-defense battle that exiles any non-land permanent you don't control until it leaves, and once defeated, it allows you to make a 1/1 soldier token whenever a non-token you control leaves play for any reason, dying, bounced, or exiled. Now, it's worth reminding you that battles are likely to get some more targeted removal pointed at them in the rotation patch, so Advance is probably more fragile than it looks, but it's just wild to think how much better this feels than Casus Belli. Casus being legendary means that extra copies feel really awful. The exile only picks off a creature or planeswalker, limiting its range as an answer, and the Anthem is a small consolation for a card type that players are already likely to be packing checks for, like Masksmith and Hungry Blob. Meanwhile, Advance hits anything, much like other premier options we have, and defeating it is worthwhile as it helps insulate your creatures from removal by replacing them if they get picked off, or opening the door for you to push your board wider with reprieve effects and flickers triggering the token generation. I don't think Casus Belli is unplayable by any measure, but it really looks awkward next to Advance of the Quiet Moon. Now, if you want a high color density enchantment that anthems your board on turn 3 effectively, I think you're much better off reaching for Consume the Divine. It's a triple white pip enchantment that puts a +1/+1 counter on creatures you control when they attack, also drawing you a card if a creature you control dies with 3 or more counters on it. Not only does that last clause count any kind of counters rather than just +1/+1, so level and keyword counters work as well, but it also just looks really good mathematically compared to its competition right now. Assimilate is lower cost, but only happens once and requires your creatures to share a type to all benefit. Portal to the Spirit Realm only buffs creatures that already have counters, and not only takes a long time to get there, but doesn't accelerate your creatures to that point very well. And Cassia the Carefree can repeatedly buff your board, but takes a lot of mana to keep doing so. Consume the Divine only asks for mana once, and rewards you every time you move to combat. I think this card's great. Mandate of Conquest isn't really as flashy as the last few cards, but it's a decent draw engine and works well for a more aristocrat-bent strategy. It's a 2 and a white enchantment that draws you a card whenever you attack with 3 or more creatures, and lets you sacrifice a non-token creature at your end step to make a pair of 1/1 Berserkers. The limitation to sacrificing non-token creatures really prices this out of actual token decks, but can do great work with things like Willing Acolyte to turn your disposable sack fodder into more sack fodder, all while fueling tools like Serve Again and pushing your board wider, either to stem aggression or swing in and start drawing cards. It's unassuming, but it could definitely do some cool things. Just a heads up, if you see a singular card at the center of the screen, there's a high likelihood that I don't think there's much to say about it. Doesn't mean necessarily that I think it's good or bad, it just means that I think it was worth talking about and there weren't many other cards I needed to say to contextualize it. Let's start off with Bastion of Orith, a 2/3 human soldier for 3 that makes a 1/1 soldier whenever you cast your second spell each turn. Official Magic just got a 2/4 version of this that acts as a modal ability and can alternatively put counters across your whole board, and while that card is so super sweet, I don't think we're playing Cosmic Grand Zenith at home here. Next is Bound Light Seraph, a 3/3 Angel Cleric for 1 and double white with Flying, Lifelink, and Reprieve that only actually stays in play if you reprieve a creature with it, since it automatically bounces otherwise. It's a solid body, but I think if you're reaching for reprieve cards, there are better candidates. Ember Caged Siegebreaker is a 3-mana 3/4 Azure Berserker with Defender and Rupture, letting it swap only blocking for only attacking after it dies. The stats are solid for the cost, and 3 mana for what is effectively a pair of 3/4s is appealing on the surface, but a lot of creatures in the format tend to need something more going for them to really break into decks usually. Up next is Radiance Unmade, a 3-mana modal instant that either exiles a tapped creature or flickers a creature and returns it tapped. Both modes are decent, but 3 is a pretty high cost for this in terms of constructed playability. And last of these more unremarkable cards is Archon of the Final March, a 3-mana 2/2 Archon Cleric with Ward 2 that grants your Berserkers lifelink and lets them put counters on a cleric you control when they die. I think that this could be amazing, but it's such a clunky Sacrifice Matters synergy tool that is unlikely to see play. Ward 2 is really nice, so if it sees play, it'll be really annoying to remove. I'm not optimistic that it will. Hopping up to 4-mana spells, we have Fieldlight Tactician, a 4-mana 3/3 elf cleric soldier with First Strike. It's a pretty bad card, but I mention it solely because of that paragraph on it. Your second spell each turn lets you return a permanent with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to play tapped with a finality counter. I think this is only really great if you're buying non-creature permanents like lands, and the options are much fewer and farther between after rotation, with Theros taking the best cheap utility enchantments with it. That all being said, this has very familiar vibes to former format staple Yeji Resplendent Idol, and it's just enough of the right notes for me to at least give it a second look, even if it never actually does anything. Did you think we'd seen the last of the white anthems in this set? Here's Diviner of the Sun, a 4-mana 3/3 Azra Cleric that gives your other creatures +1/+1 and has Rapture, not Rupture, uh, coming back as a vanilla 3/3 that can't block when it dies. I think this marks a trend in a lot of Rapture cards feeling pretty weak to me compared to the other mechanics, as I'm not sure when this dies, make something that can't block could ever really save a 4-mana 3/3 Anthem for me. And if that's not enough, I'm not sure most other Rapture cards have what it takes on their lonesome. It's really only for super cheap, super aggressive Rapture cards that even remotely impress me, and they need to be super aggressive. This just isn't that. Sacrament of the Fallen is our last white 4-drop, an enchantment that lets you return creatures from your graveyard to play with finality counters whenever a creature that costs more dies under your control. This feels very similar to Serve Again in some ways, but Sacrament, like many of the Aristocrat's return tools in this set, kind of sucks some of the excitement out of the air for me with those finality counters. I get why it has that clause, so as to keep you from repeating the same sacrifice chain of your ideal 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 drop, and so on, whenever something of a higher cost dies, but the fact that finality counters shut off death triggers takes a lot of the appeal to putting this in a sacrifice deck out, making it feel kind of just whatever. Dawn Hymn Herald is a big 5-mana 4/4 Angel Bard with Flying and Reprieve, as well as a modal enter trigger to either make a pair of 1/1 white soldiers, exile a creature a creature with power 4 or greater, or gain you 5 life. And importantly, lets you choose as many modes as you'd like if you bounced a creature with its Reprieve ability. This is the other big mono-white angel to make Radiant Devotee shine in my mind, as Herald is already a solid mid-range body with a very flexible utility suite stable to it, and being able to both accelerate it out with Radiant Devotee, put a pair of soldiers into play to further convoke out angels afterwards, and pick up a smaller creature or an angel without Reprieve to pad your life total and remove an opposing creature, is such a stellar set of options to choose from. I'm skeptical about most of the double Kindred synergies in this set, but Radiant Devotee takes several already reasonable cards and rushes them into play really well. Last for white is our classic board wipe, and you wouldn't believe it, it's another Anthem as well! To be specific, this is the 6th Anthem I've discussed so far, counting Consume the Divine and the Kindred Anthems, and like most of them, it does come with a condition, although the work being asked of you here is pretty low. Clash at Orith Cross is 3 and a double white for a 4 defense battle that destroys all creatures on enter if it was cast from your hand. When dropped to 2 defense, it begins making a 1/1 soldier at each of your end steps, and once defeated, it gives your creature tokens +1/+1 in vigilance. The big point of excitement for me here is that while this particular synergy will only last for the next 4 months, this is a phenomenal tool to use alongside ruins like Forgotten Cultivator and Testament Hill, as it clears the way for them to attack without destroying them in the first main phase, costs enough mana to spell charge them at the start of combat, and then can be immediately defeated by them to get the token engine rolling. I think this adds merit to a whole new spin on mono-white control, and it's a spin I think could do some really great things, although mono-white control is losing their best board wipe of Fall of Elantin. Moving on over to blue, we have another battle here with Advance of Ruin and Whisper, a single blue 3 defense battle with flash that bounces a creature when it enters and scries 1 on your upkeep if it's defeated. Put simply, it's been a while since we had a good 1-mana bounce spell, and while Forced Ejection is really good competition for it right now, Advance being half the cost is a strong boon, even if it doesn't bounce non-creatures. If your deck cares a lot about instants and sorceries, you're probably still reaching for Forced Ejection, but if efficiency is king and your creatures are your concern, even if you want to just pick up your own creatures, Advance is a solid way to make that happen. A better proper analog for Forced Ejection is Erase from Existence, which bounces any non-land permanent and can let you force it to the top or bottom of its owner's library if you have 4 or more instants or sorceries in your graveyard, though I think the cantrip on ejection will at least be better for the next 8 months. Chorus of One is up next, and you cannot convince me that this wasn't explicitly seeded for ninjas, since it's one of Zangi's known favorite archetypes. It's a 1/1 Angel Warlock for 1 with flash and flying, and you can pay 2 and a blue to exile it from your graveyard and make a 1/1 blue Warlock with prowess, although that token can't block the turn you make it if you hold it up as a trick. Chorus is another tricky 1-drop to slip in while holding up counter magic before teeing up a ninja in your hand, and while the competition for that slot's starting to get tough, it seems like a pretty great option to try out, especially when you can optionally can either hold it up in place of counter spells on your opponent's turn. Flutter is now our 4th single blue instant protection spell in rotation, with us having gotten one each of the last 3 rotations as well. And we're going to skip ahead in the script a bit because we might as well pull the new green protection spell into the conversation as well. Flutter is a modal spell, either giving a creature you control +1/+1 and hexproof for the turn, or shuffling target player's graveyard into their library. Make an example, and sometimes evasive tactics can each also provide a +1/+1 buff, and tactics can either have that buff be permanent, provided it's teaching vigilance to a creature that already has it, or just granting vigilance permanently. But Flutter gives blue something that it hasn't really had up to this point, which is simple pinpoint graveyard hate for cheap. I think the fact that Flutter gives blue a graveyard hate card pushes it far above the competition, and though these other spells will still have their use cases, Flutter seems safe to call the default, at least for now. Now, Refusal of the Hollow Gift has its own small consideration compared to Make an Escape as another single mana instant, with this one joining Escape and giving any permanent hexproof, though instead of buffing the creature if it's targeting a creature, it can instead also target yourself. The reason I like Refusal is actually really simple, and its name is Chronicle of Extinction. A lot of the bigger, nastier effects to rip apart your resources target you directly, and Refusal can shut both those down, as well as something smaller like an Exorcist of Errors or Duress. Trust me, I'm going to try this at least once, while Chronicle continues to make me miserable. Up next is a pair of cantrips. Can you guess which one of these I'm a bigger fan of before I finish reading these cards? Both cost a single blue mana, with Discern being an instant that draws a card and can then be cast for its flashback cost of 2 and a blue, while Stargazing is a sorcery that scries 1 and draws a card before allowing you to discard a card and return it to your hand, with the limitation that you can't cast spells named Stargazing again in the turn. As far as which one's better in my eyes, lock in your guesses in 3, 2, 1. If you said Stargazing, you probably understand why Savvy Smith is on the screen. Savvy is one of the best spellslinger tools we have in the field right now, and Stargazing just plays perfectly with it to keep the engine greased. 1 mana cantrips are always fine to use with Savvy just to get triggers off of it, either to refund the mana, rummage away something you don't need, or make a 1/1 start applying pressure. And with Savvy and Stargazing both pitching cards to the graveyard, it's possible you're already playing something like Fabricated Anomaly to pay off having that graveyard be full of fodder. Stargazing is especially good with Savvy Smith when you start running low on cards, as if it's the only card in your hand before your draw step, you can cast the spell or play the land you draw for turn, make mana with Savvy Smith if applicable, and then cast Stargazing. With an empty hand, you can have Savvy discard a whole 0 cards from your hand to draw you a card before Stargazing resolves, meaning that you'll actually have 2 cards to pick between when deciding what to pitch to pick Stargazing back up. It's a profoundly repeatable engine that just seems so perfectly tuned to the synergy we care most about right now. Discern's fine too, more of a control tool in my mind, but the competition's a lot busier there with many spells doing more for roughly the same total mana, give or take. And there, card selection is usually better than just a cantrip. Perhaps the strongest one drop in blue, we have Courtly Intrigue. It's a single mana aura that enchants a creature, letting you draw a card whenever the enchanted creature or another that shares a name with it deals damage to a player or planeswalker. Notably, this has a few pretty big implications that aren't clear on the surface. Not only does it work well on your own tokens, but it can also go on opposing tokens to draw you cards whenever they hit you. Also important is that it doesn't say combat damage, meaning a pinger like Lavaborn Slug can repeatedly draw you cards without ever having to move into combat. I can't imagine all of these interactions were intended, but only time will tell if this actually comes up for changes. If not, be ready for this to refill your hand and then some. Jumping up to 2 mana, we have another new card that's almost assuredly headed for nerfs in the new patch in Overrule Thought. It's a 2 mana instant that counters a spell unless its controller pays 2, but it costs 1 less so long as you have less lands than the opponent. The intended play pattern here is that it's a 1 mana check to the opponent's turn 2 play while you're on the draw, which already feels like a cause for some heightened attention, but there's another loophole to note here. If you sacrifice a fetch land and then hold priority, you can forcibly enable the discount clause even if you're on the play, turning this into a much more reliable 1 mana counterspell. The curators have openly said this card is being looked at, so it's due for some sort of change, but honestly, I'm not sure what could get heavily tweaked here. I already have my concerns that 1 mana counterspells that don't have any sort of condition on what they can target are probably a bit too much. I love Veto, but this is countering anything, not just non-creature spells, and Veto requires you to have played to the board in some capacity. Hopefully the adjustments to this card bring it to the realm of being somewhere reasonable. Deft Deflection's been largely overshadowed by another Zangy-designed Quench in Omen of Deception over the last 4 months, and it would be a real shame for Deflection to just be completely overshadowed by a new Zangy 2-mana counterspell moving forward. I'm hoping that these can be contenders with equal merit rather than one getting the win because it has more immediacy. Only time will tell what change ends up here, so we'll have to wait and see what the patch holds. Let's shift gears and talk about cards that I think are far tamer. Witch of the First Echoes and Pagebinder Witch are both 2-mana elf warlocks with prowess, with First Echoes being a 2/2 for double blue and has flash, while Pagebinder is a 1/1 for 1 and a blue. Both come with a trigger that fires off on each end step if you've spent 4 or more total mana to cast instants and or sorcery spells in the turn before paying you off with it. First Echoes creates a 1/1 blue warlock with prowess if the conditions met, though if you spent 8 or more mana on spells, you actually make a 4/4 black horror instead. Pagebinder, meanwhile, just lets you draw a card and discard a card. Both of these have a pretty glaring problem in my mind, which is that they're pretty plain creatures outside of the very high value spike turns, as prowess makes it pretty clear that the ideal way to spend 4 mana is on several cheaper spells. That might sound like the perfect recipe for a Savvy Smith deck, but the hoops here are a bit too high in my mind, and the payoffs are a bit too small. A much more enticing pair of 2-mana warlocks come in the form of the Merfolk Warlocks, Skytide Severer and Speaker of Currents. They both cast for 1 and a blue, with Severer being a 2/1 flyer that you can pay a blue and sacrifice to counter a non-creature spell unless its controller pays 3, while also having a single blue chant cost, letting you staple that counterspell to any instant you cast. Sorceries too, but that will probably never come up. And double up on the counterspell effect we have here. Speaker, meanwhile, is a 1/3 that makes your instant and sorcery spells cost 1 less, and allows you to put the chant abilities of creatures you control onto instants and sorceries you cast by paying those chant costs while they're in play. Together, Speaker allows you to discount any 2-mana instance, and then repay the discounted mana to append Severer's counterspell clause, locking your opponent out of removal or value pieces by forcing them to play a creature-centric plan or suffer the consequences. It's not an unbreakable lock, as it still does require mana to use both halves of this, and you'll still need instants in your hand to make it work, and your opponent can just put creatures in play to ignore this. But with them both being 2-drops, Ozon's Blessing seems perfect for teeing these up, as well as being the ideal instant to chant onto or cost reduce. We've also got a pair of token makers in blue here that are on the simpler side. Gossamer Dreamer is a 2-mana 1/2 fairy scout with flying and decoy, meaning it makes an attacking 1/1 illusion with flying when it swings in. I could see this actually getting some testing in ninja decks, since the illusions being temporary makes them great options to pick up for ninjutsu costs, and the evasion here is greatly appreciated in that context. Echoed Chant, meanwhile, is a sorcery that casts for 2, flashes back for 1 more mana, and makes a 1/1 blue warlock with prowess before allowing you to loot through a card if you'd like. Prowess creatures can sometimes be good enough to play through non-creature spells, especially since this is a prowess creature that triggers prowess essentially, but I don't think it's all that good for the mana you're spending. Covenant Brine's a simple card to move past, a 2-mana 1/4 Merfolk Warlock that grants horrors you control ward X, where X is the number of warlocks you control, and draws you a card whenever a horror you control deals combat damage to a player, planeswalker, or battle. I don't think the horrors in this rotation are so good as to make this worthwhile, and there certainly aren't any viable good ones in the field to make this any good. Advance of Dreamwoven Law is another Anthem. This 2-mana 3-defense battle only applies +1/+0 to unblocked creatures you control, meaning it doesn't block math around blocking and being blocked, but does improve the damage that ninjas deal to the opponent, as well as improve how quickly you can defeat this to draw 2 cards. Granted, a lot of the best ninjas want to be dealing combat damage to the opponent, not a battle, so there is some awkward tension there, but any 2-power creature getting through 2 Advance of Dreamwoven Law will be hitting it for 3 to draw you 2 cards. So for 2 mana, when that Anthem sticks around afterwards, and it can draw you 2 cards in the process, that seems pretty strong. Dance of the Three Courts is a weird mythic enchantment for 2 mana that cost reduces your spells by 1 for each permanent you control and each card in your graveyard with the same name as that spell, also giving your permanents ward X based on the number of other permanents with the same name. There are 2 important things here worth noting. That ward cost checks the total number of permanents on the battlefield, not just the ones you control, meaning if your opponent also has a card in play that you have, theirs is improving the ward on yours. Additionally, this doesn't care about where those spells are coming from or what cards you have and haven't played. It just asks you to have cards in your graveyard or on the board, so future ones can be made cheaper. The obvious home for this is that it gives us back Relentless Bats as a potential competitive strategy, as the cost reduction can make the bats free to surface when you have 6 other cards in your graveyard and at least 1 other bat in the bin or in play. If this doesn't cause a resurgence in that archetype, I don't imagine anything else could, but Dance does need to show up to begin the cost reduction train for your bats. If this ever sees play, there's a lot of value to be had, and there's also some other cool things you could do with eggs like Ley Shard, but there aren't as many eggs in rotation for that to be worth discussing. Gift of Stillness is a 2-mana aura that makes the enchanted creature become a 1/1 construct with no abilities, gaining Flash if you control a Warlock. It seems pretty decent, but I think Collector's Item is going to outshine it for a while unless the Flash clause proves both critical and reliable. Moving up to 3 mana, we have a couple more chant cards in Recital of the First Echo and Seer of Shackled Breath. They're both 2 and a blue, with Recital being a 2/1 Elf Warlock and Seer being a 1/3 Azra Warlock with a Vigilance. Both have an enter trigger, with Recitals regrowing an instant or sorcery from your graveyard if you cast it, while Seers taps a creature you don't control and puts a stun counter on it. Recital's chant cost of 2 and a blue lets the spell you chanted onto also regrow an instant or sorcery, which could be some sweet value, though the mana required here is really high if you're looking for the most value. Seer, meanwhile, only costs a single blue mana to chant to get the tap effect of, which could be decent, but I don't know if it's worth running a 1/3 for 3. They're both alright, but neither seems critical to play. There was a problem that happened with this slide. There should be rivaling on this slide, but it instead is locked here. Okay, let's go over Voice of a Fallen Covenant. It's a 2/3 flying horror warlock for 2 and a blue, coming in with 2 abilities that care about the relevant creature types here. It discounts your instants and sorceries by 1 for each other warlock you control, and lets your other horrors exile instants and sorceries from your graveyard as they attack to cast those spells immediately. For the warlock side of things, there are admittedly a couple spells that this can be good with. Echoed Chant, for instance, becomes much better if you control just 1 other warlock, as you can cast Chant for a single mana, then flash it back for a single mana thanks to the new token providing further cost reduction. That being said, the good warlock token generators don't really need this to get work done, so this winds up feeling a bit win more. As for the horror half, again, not a lot of great horrors to consider here, and this doing nothing on its own really stings extra in this context. But letting your Rivalings or Dormant Monstrosities become an on-attack Snapcaster Mage could be alright at least. Overall, though, Voice asks you to do a lot of work for a card you're never guaranteed to draw anyways. Reflected Echo is a 2 and a blue instant with flashback for an additional blue pip that creates a 1/1 token copy of target creature you control, removing its ability to block for the turn. We've started seeing Chronicle of Precedence show up in Golem's lists as an easy way to cop up Unspeaking and Unflinching Titan, and while Avatar's Whim exists as a less color-intensive option, it's failed to make the same impact. Reflected Echo being an instant makes it a lot better for using Unspeaking Titan Center trigger, as you can hit your opponent's creature on their turn to stun it for a full turn cycle, locking it down much like how we see Unspeaking Titan doing with Ozon's Blessing. The flashback cost being only 4 mana also means you can curve Unspeaking Titan into Echo's flashback to swing with the original Titan and the first token on turn 4 without ever needing to draw a second actual golem. I'm not sure it'll be as key as Chronicle of Precedence, in part because that card has additional flexibility, but given that Chronicle only exists in rotation for 4 more months, it's likely that Echo gets a shot with the Titans sooner or later. Unravel Thoughts might look a little familiar to seasoned Magic players of days gone by. It's a slightly reworked Cryptic command, shaving off a blue from the casting cost in exchange for not guaranteeing that you get to choose 2 modes. This 1 and double blue instant only guarantees that you can choose 1, though if each opponent has more cards in hand than you, it becomes a proper Cryptic command by letting you choose 2 modes instead. The modes are in a different order, with the counterspell dropping down 2 bullet points, but otherwise, the only notable changes are that it can't bounce lands and only taps creatures target player controls rather than all creatures your opponents control, meaning that it hits a road bump in the face of something like Ages of Grace, giving the opponent hexproof.
Beyond that, this is a super sweet tempo-leaning version of Cryptic Command, asking you to rush out cards faster than the opponent to get the most out of it. Even without that clause active, some of these modes can be worth 3 mana in a pinch, so the flexibility is nice, regardless of whether or not you get the full command, making this probably the best cancel in the format. Up next is a pair of Damage Matters spells in blue, with Seize the Golden Bloom asking you to go wide and Wait the Whispers just asking you to hit the opponent at all. Seize is 1 blue for a sorcery that searches a player's library for a non-land card with mana value X or less, based on the number of creatures that have dealt damage to them this turn, and letting you play that card for free. This is another card that doesn't ask for combat damage specifically, so pingers can help out, though they only count as a single tick for the X value no matter how many times you've pinged the opponent. With so many key cards in the format trending lower on the curve, this can often be 3 mana to play your opponent's best card, so long as it's like 3 or 4 mana, which gives you a ton of utility no matter the matchup. It always finds the best thing to turn against the opponent, and always lets you use that against them. Wait the Whispers is a lot simpler, costing 2 and a blue, but shedding the generic cost if an opponent was dealt combat damage in the turn. Beyond that, it just looks to the top 4 cards of your library, puts 1 into your hand, the rest on the bottom in a random order. It's easy, probably not too over-important, and it's possible that decks like Ninja will value this for the ability to find the card you need more reliably. Next is a pair of 3 mana spells for you to hold up for 1 in double blue, starting with Wasted Preparation. It's an instant that hard counters a spell and then lets you scry 1, though countering a spell with mana value 2 or less lets you scry 2 instead. It's no divine mishap, but if you're desperate for a hard counter, it's decent. Frog of Eternal Gloom, meanwhile, has my full attention. It's a 3/1 frog horror with flash that returns target creature you don't control to its owner's hand on enter. This completely messes with combat math after your opponent attacks, and it's functionally also just a removal spell, as you can throw this high power, low toughness body in front of the best thing for it to trade off with. Really strong stuff. This one's weird. Mistrit Archivist is a 2 and a blue 0/5 fairy wizard with decoy, and when this enters, you draw a card. In practice, this means that it draws a card when it enters and attacks, while swinging in with a grounded 1/1 illusion that's pretty easy to jump block, and a 0/5 that most likely either bounces off a blocker or gets eaten by a bunch of blockers. It's a draw engine, and draw engines can be pretty great, but I can't say with certainty if it'll actually be any good. Maybe it's worth giving a try, though. You never know it could work. And hey, if we ever get anything in future rotations that could give this Skulk, which is to say can't be blocked by creatures with greater power, that means that this suddenly just can't be blocked by anything that could kill it. Clash at Mistrit Vale is our next battle, and this one is a doozy. It's a 3 mana, 5 defense battle with a trigger to make a 1/1 white soldier whenever you cast a non-creature spell. From there, taking it down to 3 defense lets you regrow an instant or sorcery from your graveyard, and defeating it makes your non-creature spells cost 2 less to cast for the rest of the time that it's in play. I'll be honest, I think this is one of the best battles in the set. Not the singular best by any means, but there is so much to like here. This checking non-creatures instead of instants and sorceries does wonders for making it work as a clean engine to spiral the board out of control compared to Savvy Smith, only ever making 1 creature a turn. And the recursion mode is easy enough to hit and provide some great value depending on what you recur, and while I don't think the cost reduction mode is going to be as important, it can do some stellar things just from having a set of ley shards in your deck, for instance. Honestly, where I'm finding myself landing on Clash more and more over time is that it almost demands you to build a very different kind of Spellslinger deck than the one Savvy Smith has been looking for. As between it and Aether Dancer, there's a lot of ways to reward you for slinging your ley shards and other spells that can actually benefit from that discount. And of course, battles also trigger this as additional non-creature spells, so there's plenty of value to be had in multiples. Expect me to spend some time cooking with this one. I think I've got some fun ideas going. Fluttering Sun is kind of funky, and will require us skipping ahead again to pull a red card into the conversation. He's a 4-mana 4/4 Fairy Scout with flying. He doubles up the number of illusion tokens you create when you do so, which mostly just applies to decoy abilities, and then can sacrifice illusions to give your fairies hexproof for a turn. The reason this merits discussion are threefold. Firstly, it's a 4/4 with flying. Not the best possible mid-range tool, but it's a pretty solid body for the cost. The second is that any value-oriented creatures with decoy get a lot better. Remember how I said Mistrit Archivist could be decent? Gets a lot better when you're making a pair of 1/1s to draw 2 cards whenever it attacks. The third reason, of course, has to do with the red card here. Seed of the Golden Sun is 1 in a red legendary enchantment with 2 equally impactful abilities you can choose from. In play, it makes it so once each turn, you can copy up an illusion you control as it's exiled, meaning that Fluttering Sun then makes 2 more, and those new illusions are permanent. Though granted, if you sacrifice an illusion to Fluttering Sun, that will not work for Seed of the Golden Sun. If you already have Seed in play, or you're just desperate for this other ability, you can pay 1 in a red and discard it from your hand as a sorcery to create an illusion token copy of a creature you control with haste that exiles at your end step. This discard clause by itself makes this card pretty damn sweet, but Fluttering Sun doubling up that effect while still just being a reasonable creature is icing on the cake. I can't guarantee Fluttering Sun will see play, but there are certainly things to like here. Cloudveil Reshaper's up next, a 3 in a blue 0/0 fairy shapeshifter that you can have enter as a copy of any creature on the battlefield, though it gains decoy in the process. My gut says this isn't amazing because clones like these tend to need a lot of great targets, but then again, we've had fringe testing with Karina's Substitute, and there are really great creatures to be copying right now with the golems, especially since the decoy mode gets another enter trigger of whatever golem you have it copying. I don't anticipate this seeing a ton of play, but it seems neat, and unlike Substitute, it can actually copy opposing creatures in a pinch. Path of Scales is our final battle in blue. It's a 2 in double blue 5 defense battle that draws you 3 cards when it enters. Upon being knocked down to 3 defense, it permanently takes a point of power away from creatures you don't control, and upon being defeated, it copies all non-creature spells you cast. This is a really tricky one to evaluate here. My gut says the floor here is fine. 4 mana draw 3 is relatively on rate, but not astonishing. If you can take 2 defense off of it, the attack reduction clause can be really good for survivability, though the matchups where it's best at that are the ones where it can be the hardest to actually get this in play on time. Then that final clause when it's defeated, well, it's very powerful if you can get there. I'm just not 100% sure I know what kind of deck can reasonably actually be getting there. This all being said, there's also just value in this being a crazy flicker target for a few of the things that can do so, such as Brief Stop and Worrying Inspector, since it turns those cards into draw 3 cards. It's also worth noting that big burn spells like Wormshot can defeat this on their own. So if you can make it to come together with Path of Scales plus Wormshot, you can get this engine on the line immediately. Lastly, if you have an important spell that you're casting and have chanted something onto that spell, Path copying the spell also copies the chanted effect, so you can do some decently flashy things in that way as well. One final funky Warlock in blue here, and it's pretty underwhelming. Raven of Onyx Wings, a 3/3 for 5 with flying, and it bounces a permanent when it enters. You can chant it for 1 in a blue to append that bounce effect to an instant or sorcery as you cast it, but just play Forced Ejection or Erase from existence. I'm only bringing this up here because it's a 3-powered Warlock with flying, and that's because 3 become 1 is a very cool 5 mana draw spell, drawing you 3 cards at instant speed and letting you cast a spell that costs 3 or less from your hand afterwards for free. The thing that makes it funky is that it has a lengthy cost reduction clause, letting you trim the spell down to 2 mana, provided you control an artifact, a creature with flying, a creature with 3 power, and a Warlock. Importantly, a single card that meets multiple of these conditions, such as an artifact creature with 3 power or a Warlock with flying, do check off each of those conditions. You can bend over backwards to jam cards into your deck that check off multiple boxes here, like Catabolist, but I think the only one of these cards that's really worth playing is Worrying Inspector, as it plays a meaningful role in a deck that'd already want Warlocks like Exorcist of Errors, and checks off every condition other than the Warlock requirement. This all being said, I think 3 become 1 works best if you can play it in a deck that doesn't need its discount and can instead use it as additional copies of something like Aunuma's Students. 5 mana, draw some cards at instant speed, and then cast a spell for free is pretty great, even if you're just chaining out something like a Sealing Strike. And now that we have more consistency with that effect, you can do a lot more on your opponent's turn. Hushed Briefing is quietly one of the blue cards I'm most excited for. It's 4 and a blue for an instant that scries 2 and draws 2, with a critical discount by 1 for each token you control. All tokens, not just decoys and other creature tokens, but clique tokens, especially Hazak Arsenal, which you can have make more tokens when you pledge to it again. Treasure tokens, memory tokens, even things like the Read tokens from Reclusive Percipient. Hushed Breathing has so many clean ways to discount it and makes tokens feel so good that I honestly think this could single-handedly give some momentum to Unending Possibility and other Cash Matters synergies. Just imagining casting this with an Olus Mars Final Archivist on the board has me excited. And so, at the end of the blue cards, we arrive upon a mistake. I'm not trying to be rude here. I don't think it's a terribly designed card, and I actually really like it. But it's probably not a card that can be great for the format as is, as evidenced by the curators clarifying that it is a card they're reviewing for potential changes. So rather than speculating about what the changes could be, let's talk about why this can't stay as it is. Angler of the Crushing Sea is 5 and double blue for a 6/5 Leviathan Horror with a sizable chunk of text modifying how it's cast, and that full ability is within the brackets of its single blue mana chant ability, meaning it can modify how instants and sorceries are cast as well. This spell, and by proxy whatever spell it's chanted onto, costs 1 less for each instant or sorcery card in your graveyard, as well as each creature card you own in exile that has chant. Because of how chant works, the card exiles itself before the cost actually has to be determined, meaning the single blue mana spent to chant Angler contributes to the cost reduction of the spell that you're actually chanting onto. Meaning it's almost as though the blue mana was just mana you were paying for the spell anyways, and it's not like tacking additional mana onto the spell being cast. From there, you can get a potentially massive discount for your Fester Defluvium to mill a bunch of cards, make a bunch of mana, make a couple zombies, and draw a bunch of cards afterwards. Or you can just discount the flashback costs of Chronicles of Extinction and Precedence to either eradicate your opponent's hand and board, or draw a full new hand, or mill the opponent for 21. Oh, and speaking of relevant creatures that you could copy, like Chronicle would want to, remember, this discount applies to casting this from exile as well, meaning it's almost always a 2-mana 6/5 that you can then copy with your Chronicle of Precedence and make a bunch more of, and that kills your opponent really fast when you've eradicated their hand and board with Chronicle of Extinction. We'll almost certainly be talking about this card on September 1st. Sorry. It's cool. Just, let's move on before I lose my mind. Moving on to black, the next 6 cards all have a commonality, and it's honestly pretty great. We're getting Sui Black tools in REV. For those unfamiliar, Sui Black, whose full name I cannot say for YouTube content filter purposes, refers to a largely mono-black aggro strategy relying on undercosted creatures with effects that damage you over time. While many frames of reference for this kind of strategy tend to melt towards something like Death's Shadow in Modern, it has a pretty solid history of being a viable aggressive plan, and we've got some real goodies here to make it hum. Importantly, as I talk about any of these cards, and any of the black and green cards that care about your life total changing at all, just keep in mind that we have the Coalesced lands from Cyberus until May of next year, to let you spend colorless as colored mana at the cost of 1 life, and we'll have the Shock lands from Errors in the Weft until May of 2027, meaning that these cards get 5 of their 6 seasons with at least some lands in the field to help them be enabled more reliably. Bleed for the Cause and Vardo's Scalpel start off the curve as a pair of 2/2s for 1. Bleed's actually a sorcery, making a 2/2 zombie that can't block and causing you to lose 1 life, and returning to your hand at the end step if you lose 3 or more total life in a turn. Vardo's Scalpel, meanwhile, is just a 2/2 zombie assassin for 1 with Menace that deals 2 damage to you whenever it attacks. These are both solid with meaningful drawbacks, but they just help apply pressure from turn 1 onward and just get better as we go deeper. One additional note is that Blade for the Cause's recursion mode isn't dependent on you ever having cast it, so you can actually also discard it to a looter engine like Ignited Soul or the Puzzle Box from Fabricated Anomaly, provided you can reliably lose 3 life on your turn to get it back. Up next are a pair of decent but not supremely critical 2-drops to back up this curve. Both are 2/1 clerics for 1 and a black, with Silent Veteran being a spirit with flying and death touch that just loses 2 life for you when it enters, while Sundered Heretic is an elf that gets a +1/+1 counter at your end step if your life total changed that turn. Heretic's probably a bit more important than Silent Veteran since it's a scaling threat over time, but I could see either or both of these getting into a Sui Black style of aggro deck, whether that's in mono black or black green. And of course, there's also a few non-creature spells relevant to the discussion here. Sovereign's Execution is another classic 2-mana instant removal spell with a condition that can be cleared by a set mechanic, like Drag to Hell and Hang from last rotation. It destroys a creature with power 3 or less, or regardless of stats if your life total changed in the turn. I don't know why I paused so long there. Nice Whisper, meanwhile, is a pretty big reprint from Official Magic that we've had a couple variants of in the format, though none of those ever truly thrive like how Nice Whisper could. It's a simple 2-mana sorcery that draws you 2 cards and costs you 2 life. Simple, clean, quite effective. We'll see if this starts getting some play. Also, I realize why I paused. It's because my script says Drag to Hell. I mean Drag to the Dark. I blended that and Damn to Hell in my head. So yeah, pretty solid 2-mana commons. Unmaker of Thought in advance of the Umbral Bargain are a pair of hand attack 2-drops to add to your arsenal. Unmaker is a 1/1 human warlock that can make your opponents with 2 or more cards in hand discard a card both when it enters and as a single black mana chant ability to attach to a spell. Advance, meanwhile, is a 4 defense battle that makes the opponent reveal their hand, letting you force them to discard a non-land card of your choice at the cost of 1 life. From there, once it's defeated, it makes the opponent lose 2 life at their upkeep if they have 1 or fewer cards in their hand. As with some of the blue battles, Advance can be a stellar flicker target with the right tools, and Unmaker can kind of do that too. Though, of course, with Unmaker being unable to clear the final card in the opponent's hand, it is limited in terms of its ability to impact the game as the turns go by and resources are expended. They're both solid, though. Next to Unmaker are a pair of much more awkward Chant Warlocks at 2 mana. Weaver of Brooding Threads is a 2-mana 3/1 elf warlock with a convoluted enter trigger to make a 4/4 horror and a 4-mana enchant ability, not enchant, just chant ability to make a 4/4 horror as well. Essentially, if you ever cast Weaver from the graveyard or reanimate it from the graveyard or just have it come in from graveyard to play in some capacity, it exiles itself and replaces itself with a 4/4. There are a handful of cheap ways to get this reanimated, with highlights including Garen, Extraction Mission, Bind Life to Steel, but I think this is probably not worth the trouble, since the other things you can get back do things besides just being a 4/4. Tender Vow, which has even less to be said. It's a 1/2, gains you 2 life whenever you cast a non-creature spell, and you can chant it for a single black to just gain 2 life with the spell that it goes onto. Life gain can be important for black decks leaning on aggressive Vigor tools, but I think it's much more likely to see play as a sideboard tool for Spellslinger and control decks that are just sick of losing to burn in aggro. 1-mana flashback spells like Industrialize gain you 4 life across the 2 casts, and that can be pretty good. And hey, here's that first card for, I left out a thing from my last script. I mentioned that there were some cards in this set that can get back Weaver that we hadn't yet talked about, and this is the first one. Don't use this to get back Weaver. Just don't play Weaver. I don't think Weaver is good. Anyways, Call of the Crown is a double X and double black sorcery that returns all creature cards with mana value X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield with a finality counter on each of them. Also giving each your choice of a Menace, Death Touch, or Lifelink counter depending on what creatures you want to have with what. The finality counters, as always, really sting, but otherwise this has a major problem named Bind Life to Steel. Whereas Call's X value is effectively half of whatever mana you're pouring into the spell, Bind Life to Steel's kinda as though the X value is doubled, bringing back less total creatures if your graveyard is absolutely massive, but meaning that Bind can just bring back a bunch of the key things with ease. Think about it this way. Spending 4 mana on Bind Life to Steel lets you rebuy 4 total mana value worth of creatures, whether that's 4 1-drops or a handful of other different things, whereas Call of the Crown for 4 mana gets back all of your 1-drops with finality counters and other keyword counters, and then that's it, and if they die, they're gone for good. I think Call of the Crown can build a bigger board with enough cards in your graveyard, but with the time it takes to get there, I think Bind is just the more reliable way of getting it done. Clash at the Shaded Maw feels very reminiscent of designs from patch notes gone by. It's a 2-mana 5-defense battle that starts off as a graveyard hate tool. If cards would be put into exile into opponents' graveyards from anywhere, exile them instead. This shuts off all the obvious suspects like Reanimator and Flashback spells, while also stopping things like Root Fossil from actually getting a land back from the bin. From there, at 2 defense or lower, it mills the defending player for 2 whenever you attack them. And upon being defeated, it gains an end step trigger, letting you pay life equal to the cost of a card exiled with it to play that card for free. This reminds me a lot of Shrine to Finax, which used to be very different from what you see on screen here. In fact, let's pull up that older version real quick. The old Shrine to Finax, changed in the November patch last year, used to let you exile one of the cards it milled if the shrine count was met, allowing you to cast that card in perpetuity from there on out. While Clash of the Shaded mod doesn't give you that degree of flexibility, and the cards will cost you life to play, it's safe to say that the value on offer here has some historical precedent of being very good. So keep your eyes on this one. Let's talk about a couple more pieces of 2-mana black interaction. Die As Thou Wilt is a 2-mana instant modal spell, letting you give a creature +1/+1 and indestructible, or forcing a player to sacrifice a creature. It's fine, though Kitsuo brought what's likely to better edict for the near future. Extract the Truth is a 2-mana sorcery that's also modal, either hand attacking the opponent for a creature or enchantment or planeswalker card, or forcing the opponent to sacrifice an enchantment. Also fine, also probably struggling to fight for its slot compared to other tools, though the hand attack here is a nice bit of flexibility to make it compelling. Finally, Heart's Betrayal is a 2-mana instant that destroys a creature or planeswalker, costing you life equal to whichever is higher between the permanent's mana value and power. It's a nice catch-all tool, but that life tax can tick pretty high compared to something like Sovereign's Execution, though this does at least check planeswalkers as well. Pact Beyond Death is another case of us having to jump a little ahead of schedule to bring a 5-drop into the conversation here. It's a 6 defense battle for 1 and a black that mills you for 3 cards and returns 1 to your hand upon enter. It's just a bit of card selection. When dropped to 4 defense, it begins gaining you 2 life whenever you draw a card, and once defeated, it exiles all creatures that didn't damage it this turn. Now, before we get to this other card, let's talk about that second effect here. We've got a couple familiar faces from the last set review back once again, with Ascends to Power being able to combo with the life gain clause here once flipped into Omnipotence, as you can pay 1 life to draw a card freely and then gain 2 life back. From there, Moonlight Adversary is once again the easy win condition, discarding down to your 0 card maximum hand size and throwing all of the cards in your hand at your opponent for damage in the process. Importantly, you should not run this with Lifehacker, as Lifehacker's draw ability once leveled up forces you to draw whenever you gain life, guaranteeing that you will accidentally deck yourself with Pact Beyond Death if you aren't careful. Beyond all these interactions, Pact's board wipe mode can actually be cheated thanks to another new card, seen here, Surge of Bitter Breath. It's 4 and a black for a sorcery modal spell, with the modes to remove all counters from any number of target permanents or destroy all tokens, gaining you life either for the number of counters removed this way or the number of tokens destroyed this way. Surge's first mode automatically defeats any and every battle it targets, while killing every planeswalker you want off the board and shrinking any creatures with +1/+1 counters. There's also merit of peeling haze counters off of raptured creatures, though I don't think that changes anything, and you can pull finality counters off of creatures to actually let them die. Realistically, though, Surge is just a decent tech card against token strategies, with the flexibility to turn it into a full board wipe if you have Pact Beyond Death in play. As just some icing on the cake. I think if you're really invested in defeating Pact, then you're better off leaning on Wormshot, since that has a lot more flexibility outside of Pact and defeats it exactly at instant speed. I intend to try Pact out a lot moving forward, with or without the Ascend to Power combo, and if you plan on following my footsteps, I highly advise you to play other battles that are good, that like being defeated by things like Wormshot, and other spells like Wormshot that are really good at defeating battles, so you can use Pact Beyond Death as a board wipe without having to invest to the board as much. Last for our black 2-drops is Reverie of the Endless Maw, which is a bit hard to evaluate in some respects, but has some exciting potential to it for reasons that the base text box doesn't necessarily make clear. It's a 2-mana enchantment with, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, mill a card, and an end-step clause reminiscent of some other Warlock abilities. If you spend 4 or more mana on instants and sorceries this turn, you can rebuy a creature or planeswalker. Now, obviously, there's a lot of weird value things you can do here, but pull back from the allure of endless creature recursion for a second. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, mill a card. This is what Jack Monster Mentor has been waiting for, a repeatable mill engine with a very low bar to allow Jack to start machine gunning down the opponent in style. This version, of course, is a strategy you can get away with Lifehacker, as having a hand over the maximum hand size while you have Jack in play, and a leveled up Lifehacker lets you discard permanents to hand size to keep pinging Jack and drawing with the hacker. It also just helps that Jack and Lifehacker are both solid cards alongside Reverie, and you can kind of get away with a lot of solid non-creature permanents in a Reverie deck. Think about it this way. Ley Shard mills you a card with Reverie, triggers Jack when the card is milled, you crack Ley Shard, trigger Jack again, draw a card, add a mana, and can keep the value train rolling. There's always got to be a puzzler. Rianona Pactborn is a 3/3 Fox Warlock with Menace for 3 mana with a seemingly powerful end-step trigger, reanimating a horror from your graveyard if you control 3 or more Warlocks. The only problems? The number of cheap Stellar Warlocks are pretty few and far between, and the horrors worth reanimating are infinitely less so. If you can figure this one out, I will absolutely applaud you, but for me, this is going to require future sets to make work. Up next, we have a pair of seemingly aristocrat-bent zombie and spirits matter cards, starting with Guardian of Ashen Oaths. It's a 3/2 spirit for 1 black that has lifelink and gives your other zombie and spirits lifelinks as well. From there, you can tap it and pay 5 life to make a 2/2 that can't block, and hopefully that can start regaining you some of that life that you're rapidly bleeding. The only big kindred synergy I can find here is Pressuring Ghoul, which is pretty... the only important kindred synergy anyways is Pressuring Ghoul, which is pretty handy as a lifelinking flyer that hurts the opponent's life total and hand over time. As for its aristocrats implications, we can turn to Advance of the Hollow Wake, which is a similarly costed 4 defense battle that makes a pair of those unblocking tokens when it enters, and becomes a Zulaport Cutthroat when it's defeated, draining the opponent for 1 each time a creature you control dies. This can be handy for ratcheting up the pressure applied by Inklight Dancer, though if I'm entirely honest, I don't think you really need or want to jump through those hoops. Guardian's a reasonable, albeit risky tool, and I think Advance is just a bit too much trouble. If the token's blocked, it'd be a different story, but we can always dream. Outlive Usefulness is an interesting Hero's Downfall variant, though it's got some stiff competition right now in the form of Out with the Old. Outlive destroys a creature or planeswalker at instant speed for 3 mana, and then forces its controller to sacrifice a token. My gut says the token clause will either not come up or be relatively weak depending on the situation, as there are very few cases that I can think of where that clause mattering, without the opponent having a bunch of tokens to choose from, actually happen. Out with the Old's probably going to stay as the removal spell of choice in this role, but it's only around for 1 more season, so maybe Outlive Usefulness will get some usefulness in the following rotation. Go Blank is not only a reprint from Official Magic, it's also a card the format already had in Data Wipe. It sees a bit of play for when you really want the Chronicle of Extinction hand attack mode without paying the extra mana. Not much more to be said. Heading into the start of the year, Heavy Winds was nerfed from 2 mana to 3 in conjunction with Chi-Q Chaos Reigns joining the format, partly because of concerns that it would be too effective at locking out aggressive strategies, but also due to concerns about a combo strategy between it and Gloomy Meteorologist, giving Storm-like plans a clear win condition. The deck was tried anyways, in spite of the nerf, and it was not good. Pretty awful, actually. Anyway, here we are 8 months later, and now we don't even have to jump through hoops. Hollowbark Seer is just a 3 mana 3/2 menacing elf warlock that makes each opponent lose 1 life whenever you cast a non-creature spell. I don't think it's very good, but you could jam it with some unearth effects like Stained Strokes to return it in case you discard it or have it killed, and you can combo off to your heart's content knowing you never have to think of Heavy Winds as a combo tool again. I don't really have much to say here. Reliquary Sentinel's a 5/3 for 3, sacrifices at your end step if Vigor's offline and it didn't enter this turn. It's a vanilla body, so it's pretty lackluster, but I mean, it hits for a quarter of your opponent's starting life total, I guess. Probably not going to see play. Similarly, Thrice Sealed Blessing is a big hoop to jump through on a 4 mana enchantment to give your creatures a big power boost, an annoying ward cost, and super menace. Only if you have exactly 3 creatures. Don't get me wrong, I think the 8th Anthem of the set review could do some flashy things, but the ward cost doesn't really do enough to stop the opponent from disabling this at their own convenience, to the point where I'm not even sure I'm comfortable calling this an Anthem. It's just that unreliable. Kills pretty fast if it's online, but it's really trivial to take it offline. We now arrive at another card that's likely to be changed in Reclaim the Fallen. It's a 4 mana reanimation spell with flashback for 6, and the 4 mana base casting cost is kind of the whole problem here. We got to see firsthand back in May that Shigane Manor Burns is really good with 4-mana reanimation, with how much the Stratostorm deck was capable of exploding out of the gate if not immediately contested. While we technically do still have 4-mana reanimation in Dark Horse Victory, it isn't really doing much, in part because of the limitations to its effect, made particularly noticeable with the biggest Planeswalker to reanimate rotating out when Exalts joins the format. Reclaim the Fallen, meanwhile, has no such limitation. Any creature will do. Play Shigane Manor Burns, make a tapped treasure, and the following turn, discard your reanimation target for the second chapter for a pair of cards off the top that you may never need to play before jamming a reanimation spell on turn 3 for your biggest bomb. It's a play pattern that the curators don't really love, so it's likely to get a slap on the wrist before joining the field. Next, we have Matriarch of Veiled Kin, which seems liable to be pretty phenomenal given a recent addition to the field in Errors in the Weft. It's a 4-mana 2/2 Azra Warlock, and yet another Anthem, this time giving your other Warlocks +1/+1 and a combat damage trigger to make opponents discard cards. If that were all, this wouldn't be remarkable, but the big line here is its Enter trigger, revealing cards from the top of your deck until you flip a Warlock with mana value 2 or less, and put it right into play. Now, while there are some sweet Warlocks we've mentioned, like Skytide Sever, to go fine with this, let's be real for a second. You're playing 1 to 2 copies of this in a deck running Exorcist of Errors and no other Warlocks, so that your 4-drop goes and finds Exorcist of Errors, makes it a 3/4, and then can have your Exorcist continue hand attacking the opponent whenever it hits them. I think even if Exorcist bites the bullet for Matriarch Sins ahead of rotation, I think this could still see play. And if it goes unchanged, we'll absolutely be seeing this around here and there. Least of all because that Enter trigger works when it's flickered by something like Soul Space Refit, a card that has naturally been seeing play with Exorcist of Errors in blue and black. Okay, so we've covered a couple board wipes so far, but let me show you the one that I've seen very little chatter about and I feel deserves more attention. Reign of Blight is 2 and double black for a sorcery that gives all creatures -3/-3 until end of turn. Big deal, I hear you saying. We get that for 3 mana with Coup d'etat, and you keep talking about how many anthems are in this set, so what good is -3/-3 anyways? Well, to that hypothetical viewer, I would say, first of all, Reign of Blight doesn't ask you to play 3 colors. Second of all, Chronicle of Extinction with it -3/-3 for 4 mana was so good it got nerfed down to -2/-2 and still sees play. And third of all, yeah, anthems are going to be a problem that we're just going to have to live with, but at least a bunch of them only impact attack, and more importantly than any of those cases, we aren't done with Reign of Blight quite yet. By any chance, like say a Planeswalker gained you a bit of life, or you paid life to a Coalesced land, if your life total changed in the turn, Reign instead gives all creatures -5/-5, picking off much taller boards and providing a check to a lot more relevant threats than Chronicle and even Coup fail to deal with. Do I think it's going to be the best new board wipe? Probably not. Do I think it's going to boot Chronicle of Extinction out of the format at least? People are probably going to reach for Chronicle for flexibility reasons, and I'll stay mad about it. But I do sincerely think we'll be seeing a lot of Reign of Blight over the next 2 years unless it catches a change due to ubiquity at any point. Graveborn Confidant is probably not worth playing. It's a 4/3 warrior for 4, exiles the top card of your library at end step if your life total changed in the turn, and you can play cards exiled by it so long as you've gained or lost more life than their mana value in a turn. Needing to gain or lose more, not equal, means that even lands need a little bit of work to earn, so probably not worth playing, but I felt like it was worth at least talking about. And hey, it's 2 more decent but largely mediocre chant creatures. Drowned-Tide Exhumer is a 4-mana 2/2 Warlock Merfolk that regrows a non-Merfolk card from your graveyard to your hand, both when it enters and as a spell it's chanted onto for a single black mana resolves. Although I imagine this will get changed in the patch because I can't imagine this is meant to get back any card and not just creature cards. Fiend of the Crimson Pact heralds in our 5-drops in black with a 5-mana 6/6 Demon Horror with flying that tutors up any card from your hand either when it deals combat damage to a player or planeswalker, or if chanted onto a spell for 1 black and 3 life. I don't have the highest hopes for either of these, but I will acknowledge that Fiend's a pretty great body and effect for the cost. That chant ability is probably just not what you want to be doing. If you can get this into play quickly, yeah, Fiend kills people pretty quickly, and that is a lot of value to be had as far as just finding things to make sure your opponent can't come back. And now, this mid-range nightmare. Steep the Pact Wen is a 4 and a black sorcery with a ton of text that essentially equates to create 3 2/2 warlocks with random upkeep triggers. Yeah, that's it. For each of the tokens, you'll randomly give it one of 4 upkeep triggers, either giving an opposing creature -1/-1 for the turn, making each opponent discard a card, making each opponent lose 2 life, or gaining you 2 life. There are some awkward combinations here to be sure, like ending up with life gain 2 or even 3 times, but it's still 3 2/2s for 5, and some of the abilities here can be particularly annoying. Factor in that fighting these tokens individually costs your opponent resources, while some of these can bleed them of resources, and then consider that your deck can have more than one of these spells. Yeah, this is just a really good army and a can spell for mid-range decks. Casting costs also just really simple, so it's great in mono black and in much more dynamic mana bases as well. Ram of Obsidian Heart's pretty bad outside of limited, but it's getting a mention solely because it's a big horror that's not awful to reanimate with Rhiannona. It's a 6/6 sheep horror with menace for 5 and a black, and whenever it enters or attacks, it has target opponent lose 3 life and you gain 3 life. Not stellar, not atrocious. If Rhiannona's animating something, it's probably this, but that doesn't feel amazing. I keep repeating myself when mentioning that there aren't a lot of great ways to go wide with warlocks, and while I've talked about some properly great warlocks in this section, especially Steep the Pact one, it brings me no joy to say Bull of the Branded Flame looks really bad. It's a 5/5 Ox horror with menace for 6 and double black, though it costs 1 less to cast for each warlock you control and can tap 3 untapped warlocks to return a horror from your graveyard to your hand. The only thing I can say here is that 2 copies of Steep the Pact Wen gives it a full discount, so instead of spending 8, you can spend 10 mana to get this for 2. Yeah, let's move on. It's the midpoint of the review. I'm taking a break to catch my breath real quick, but you won't notice too much of a pause here since I'll just be pausing the recording, so no wait on your end. Before I do, though, it's a good time to remind you that while I'm hydrating, it's good for you to do so as well, and while you're at it, be sure to check out all those links in the description to find the resources to dive into the format yourself. There should also be an info card up in the top right corner right about now, and a link in the description to Dr. Chipmunk's own review of the set. As of recording this video, her review only just went up today, so I have no idea where our thoughts converge and diverge. Highly recommend you give her video a watch. She's been doing great in GPs as of late in this past season, and she's got some really good experience as a designer as the person behind the Errors in the Weft set. Though maybe at least stick around for the rest of this review first. The link will still be in the description with everything else. I'll see you all in just a second for you and a couple minutes for me. Alrighty, that break took about 50 minutes more than I thought it would, but it was nice to have a meal and get myself refreshed in terms of handling everything we still have to go, because I'll be honest with you, this is slide 98 of 213. So halfway point is kind of bending the definition of halfway. Anyways, let's kick off red with a pair of 1-mana 1/1 creatures that both put more than one body into play, kind of, but in very different fashions. Emberforged Forerunner is a human berserker with haste and rupture, so the first time it dies, you'll get it back as a 1/1 without haste that can no longer block. Proclaimer of Blooming Wing, meanwhile, is a fairy scout with just decoy, so it'll make a 1/1 with the same name when it attacks, and that vanishes at the end step. These both don't seem world-shaking by any measure, but each has their little advantages. Sack outlets like Inklight Dancer could like either or both of these, as they can both function as multiple pieces of fodder for those purposes. Though I like Emberforged a little better in that context because you don't have to attack to get the second body. That being said, if you can guarantee the Proclaimer doesn't die in combat, suddenly that's the better sacrifice tool, since it's functionally a 1/1 for 1 that makes a new piece of sacrifice fodder every turn. Realistically, though, we should probably look at something more like Io the Great Equalizer, and in that context, Proclaimer wins big time. Proclaimer already making tokens on turn 1 means it helps scale your Kitsune Matriarchs, and swings in for 6 on a single 1-drop courtesy of Io. I'm not sold on Proclaimer in token strategies, but it could do a lot of work. If you're looking for something more traditionally aggressive, Fang of the Pale Thorn has you covered. It's a 2/1 fairy assassin that can't block and exiles the top card of your library whenever it attacks, letting you play the last card it exiled until the end of your next turn after when it has died. The one big wrinkle here is that you will almost never have direct control over what card you will get to play off of this, meaning your opponent can decide whether the damage they're taking here is worth denying you the card it just exiled. Granted, the card being playable until the end of your next turn means you can also always spend the current turn developing other things, and save whatever card got exiled for your following turn's play. Now, Hero in the Making has had some solid pedigree to it as both functionally a 1-mana 2/2, as well as a 1/1 that can buff up your other non-legendary creatures for a point of pseudo-hasty damage. With it heading out the door, Red's aggressive strategies will naturally want to find a good 2-power creature to fill the void, and Fang certainly has appeal in that regard. The only hiccup here comes in the form of Artful Hologram, the red level-up rare that requires blue or green mana to start scaling it up. Hologram's first leveled ability is pretty taxing to get to, only arriving, I believe, at level 3, so it's ultimately more of a 4-mana 4/3 in that context, but the freedom to develop it over multiple turns while putting it into play on turn 1 can be pretty great, and it draws you a card every time it hits the opponent from then onward, compared to Fang only exiling one card and only ever letting you play one card. Fang's the creature you're happier to lose to spot removal, at least, since you also lose whatever mana you invested into Hologram by comparison, but I think the real advantage to Fang is just that it doesn't ask you to run a lot of a specific other color, since Hologram uses no red mana to level up, so you need a lot of green or a lot of blue to make it hum. Doctrine of Sacrifice is our newest, flashy red combat trick to add to the arsenal, and much like the best options we've had in the format for a while, it grants power boosts and trample for just 1 mana. It's an instant, giving a creature you control +2/+0 while having it gain trample and rapture until end of turn. This, honestly, is probably the strongest Rapture card, solely because it means your small aggressive creatures, whose abilities may well be secondary to their stat line, if not even actively detrimental like some of the cards in Mono Black, for example, are, can now withstand being picked off by removal or trading in combat, while not only trampling over opposing blockers, but also coming back without any of those potentially pesky drawback abilities, just at the cost of also losing any beneficial ones and the ability to block. Put simply, it's a feign death in red with an aggressive bent to it, and given the strength of tricks like Momentous Charge and Face of Animosity, I think it's very possible we still see those two spells played alongside Doctrine, even without Ephemia or any other heroic cards to give them more value. Magma Spray is printed into the format for the very first time here, filling a void being left behind by punishment from Nyx, leaving with Theros. We've still got Shock for 5 seasons, thanks to its printing and errors in the weft, but if the face damage isn't as important as shutting off death triggers, or you're not as concerned about shocking a battle for 2 or dealing 2 to a planeswalker, Magma Spray can be a really solid candidate for consideration. For those unfamiliar, it's a 1-mana instant that deals 2 damage to a creature, exiling it if it would die this turn. Solid cheap removal tool for red, and helps the color out if death triggers ever start to become too much of a problem. Our last red 1-drop is a bit of a head-scratcher. Rebirth Through Seasons is a single-mana enchantment with a 2-mana activated ability, letting you sacrifice a creature to put a +1/+1 counter on a creature, but only outside of combat. This means you won't be able to sacrifice any chump blockers or small tokens getting blocked, but can funnel your tokens into beefing up the stats of something more important. I'm struggling to find the right applications here, but this does seem like it could do some sweet things, especially with how cheap it is to get into play. The best I've come up with is playing it alongside Ballot Registrar, since that can both pledge to Hazak Arsenal to start making 2/2s with Decayed, as well as discount the activation cost on Rebirth Through Seasons to hopefully make it more valuable. There's this weird blue-red sacrifice deck that's kind of emerging thanks to decoy tokens, and maybe this is something that works together well. Verdict's still out on how to use this most effectively, but it's a neat puzzle. Now, perhaps the more clearly purposed sacrifice outlet here is Soulflame Mystic, a 2-mana 2/1 fairy shaman that sacrifices creatures for 1 mana to deal 1 damage to target player or battle. Inklight Dancer has increasingly proven itself, at least in my eyes, as being a really great sacrifice outlet, though it has a couple things giving it a clear edge over Soulflame Mystic. The Adventure on Dancer gives it far more play outside of dedicated sacrifice strategies, but decks that care about its sacrifice outlet mode really need to lean heavily towards black in order to actually activate it reliably, compared to Mystic, which does not have any such requirement and can also help you defeat your battles in a pinch. Whether you're monocolor, two color, or even five color sacrifice somehow, any color of mana can be funneled into the Mystic. And of course, with it being a 2-drop, Ozon's Blessing can grab this or the Dancer depending on what you might need. We'll get into another sneaky way that this could be important way down the line, but for now, let's just say that having redundancy across cards with different names is pretty important for a more combo-leaning plan like Aristocrats moving forward. And having color-agnostic sacrifice outlets, also really good. Sorry, my brain got a little tangled because my script mentions a thing that I said I was going to mention later on in the Colorless section. I don't actually really mention it in the Colorless section, but I'll probably go off script there to talk about this a little more. Moving on. Next we have Gilded Noon Entertainer, a 2-mana 3/2 fairy bard with a properly great attack trigger given the context of the format it's entering. Whenever it attacks, you can discard a card to draw a card, with the Entertainer gaining first strike for the turn if you pitched a non-land card this way, though you're not forced to ever do any of it if you like all the cards in your hand. This is about the best stat line you can ask for in a red 2-drop right now, and it comes on something that not only digs you deeper towards your relevant cards, but also sets up synergies with things like Fabricated Anomaly and Flashback spells, and becomes an absolute nightmare to block on board. I have really high hopes for this one. I think it not only becomes one of the go-to 2-drops for mono red and other red-based aggro strategies, it also is a huge buff to one of my favorite aggressive strategies, which is looter aggro. I've been meaning to revisit it since the +1/+1 counter angle got its legs swept out from underneath it in the June patch, and this set's got a lot of really nice sneaky tools for it, so we'll see how it shapes up. Now, we spoke about Seed of the Golden Sun earlier, but I do want to revisit it briefly so we can talk about its competition. See, there are a pair of 2-and-a-red sorceries that copy a creature for the turn and sacrifice the token instead of exiling it, which I've been trying to find a reasonable home for here and there. In comparison to Seed's discard mode, which skips past most counterspells besides Death Deflection, Patent Pending lets you force the token to be blocked this turn and potentially give it Death Touch if you can spend green and black on it respectively, while Oni Artifice can copy an opposing creature and technically draws you Vengeful Artificer in exile once it's resolved. The mana cost on these effects is what I think has primarily held them back, and granted, Twin Flame has never really been profoundly playable and constructed, nor has Heat Shimmer or anything like that, even in the most recent iterations of this effect in official Magic, but you never know when an effect like this can start putting in work. We've got another pair of token-leaning 2-drops here, starting with Gilded Noon Runner. It's a 1/3 fairy rogue with Menace and Decoy, which I only really felt was necessary to mention at all, because while it's not a lot of damage on its own, we've seen a lot of new anthems in this set, and 2 mana for a pair of menacing attackers requires a lot of blockers on the opponent's side to actually mitigate the damage here. I don't think it'll be earth-shattering, but this does feel like it could put in some work. Bloodline Insider, meanwhile, is a more interesting sacrifice-leaning card as a 1/1 Azra Berserker that makes a 1/1 Berserker when it dies, as well as coming back to play thanks to Rapture. I keep saying Rupture. 3 bodies to sacrifice for 2 mana is traditionally pretty great for Aristocrats decks, but I don't think it's so amazing that it will be what puts sacrifice on the map. Advance of the Blazing Court has proven pretty tough for me to evaluate because it feels like there could be something going here, but it's just not really selling me on it. It's a 2-mana 3 defense battle that makes it so your creatures becoming blocked still lets them deal 1 damage to whatever they were attacking, meaning even on a board full of opposing blockers, 3 1/1 tokens sent in to die in combat damage can defeat this regardless of if they get through or not. Beyond that, though, I can't really parse if defeating this is actually worth your time. A lot of the token decks right now tend to spend mana really well, so 2 mana to sacrifice a land for a single soldier token? Just not that remarkable, unfortunately. Now let's talk about probably the best cheap token matters cards in red, starting with Undara of Fervor and Flame. It's a 2/1 legendary Azra Archer for 2, and whenever a creature you control enters without having been cast, you can choose one of their 3 modes that has yet to be chosen in the turn, either putting a +1/+1 counter on Undara, giving Undara Menace for the turn, or just scrying 2 cards. Undara is a solid scaling body with some decent evasion and additional value, and while it's far from the likes of Kitsune Matriarch, it still does some pretty sweet things. And hey, if you're returning this to play from the graveyard, Undara can trigger off itself and just start out as a 3/2. Seems especially sweet if you're jamming decoy creatures and other things that just repeatedly spit bodies onto the board. Doctrine of Cleansing Flames, meanwhile, is a new potential sideboard tool that I could see squeezing into the main deck of some token strategies. It's a 2-mana modal sorcery, either making a pair of 1/1 Berserkers or exiling an artifact. With graveyard synergies and themes ranging from fossils to even just fabricated anomaly triggers, artifacts going to the graveyard tends to not feel as awful as them getting exiled, so this one, doing the latter, can be really nice. And the floor of this just making 2 tokens for 2 is already exactly what a lot of token decks are looking for. The biggest question just becomes if it'll boot out any of the other spells that the deck's already leaning towards, and if it can compete well with the new options that White is bringing in this set. I think it could, and we'll get to this a bit later down the road, but I think the Berserker line of text is actually important. Last of our red 2-drops is another tough-to-evaluate card for me in Coordinated Shot. It's 3 damage at sorcery speed, and while that's not stellar compared to having this on an instant, we have had sorcery speed lightning strikes see some play here and there between Magma Flow and Chronicle of Armageddon. The advantage that Coordinated Shot has over these is that it can be flashed back for 3 in a red by sacrificing a creature. I can't say with certainty that this will be what pushes it over the top, but Savvy Smith and Clash at Mistrit Vale do make a lot of incidental creatures, and this can be both good at ticking some defense off of your battles and even defeating them. I did mention that finding spells which could actually benefit from Clash's cost reduction could be important, and this being 1 to cast and 2 to flash back with Clash defeated is absolutely a way to count that as a beneficial interaction. Though again, I'm not sure if the best Clash decks will actually want to be in blue and red. They might still just want to be in blue and white instead. Advance of Fire and Faith is a new side grade, or potentially even upgrade, to Saboteur's Immolation. While that's an instant, this is a sorcery speed 3 defense battle for 2 in a red that deals 2 damage to each creature you don't control. Once defeated, it gives all of your creatures haste. The fact that this doesn't hit your own creatures already makes it a reasonable tool for red aggressive and token strategies to combat similar archetypes or pick off blockers. And the haste that it gives can be really impactful if you ever spend time to defeat it. It can even be flickered with things like Brief Stop and Worrying Inspector if you're desperate for ways to repeat this and shred the opponent's board turn after turn. I think it's quietly one of the best red cards in the set. I didn't even realize that when I first grabbed this to be reviewed, but the fact that it misses your creatures does a lot to sell me on it. There's another big red battle here in Clash at Scorchroot Bluff. 1 red for 4 starting defense, and at the beginning of combat on your turn, you make a pair of 1/1 red fairies with haste that sacrifice at the next end step. When you've taken away half of its defense, it lets you discard a card to draw a card, and once defeated, it's another Anthem, giving your creatures +1/+0 permanently. Ultimately, I think even just the base effect here is worth your time. Making a pair of hasty temporary 1/1s every turn helps to apply pressure in token decks, provide fodder for sacrifice strategies, and do other things like trigger effects that care about you making a bunch of things in a turn really well. And hey, they sacrifice innately, unlike decoy tokens, so they look a lot better with sacrifice synergies like Damned Cards and Smiling Sludge. Next up's a pair of impulse card effects, with one being an control and spellslinger tool mostly, while the other skews much harder towards a mid-rangey or aggressive plan. Ashes of the Self is a 2 and a red instant that scries 2 before impulse drawing 2 cards, exiled and available to play until the end of your next turn. The full additional turn to play these makes it reasonable enough to play at sorcery speed, and if this deck does in fact want to be in red, I think it's a really solid card advantage tool for something like Clash at Mistrit Vale, since it benefits from the full discount there and is a perfectly reasonable card on rate. Eclipse of the Divine, meanwhile, is our last battle in red and comes down with 5 defense for 1 red, exiling the top 3 cards of your library when it enters. Once it's knocked down to 3 defense, it lets you play the cards exiled until the end of your next turn, and from there it can be defeated to make your attacking creatures into 4/4 angels with flying. This is the kind of draw spell token decks are dreaming of, because while the effort required to clear this can be very real, once it's defeated, the stats added onto your 1/1s accelerates your clock tremendously. I don't think I could ever feel comfortable in a game where my opponent has defeated this thing. Burn to Obscurity is a strong new red burn spell for 1 red, coming in at instant speed to deal 4 damage to any target, stripping away Indestructible from any creature or planeswalker it hits, and making sure that permanent goes right to exile if it would die that turn. Electronic countermeasures punching a little higher and having a more flexible casting cost makes it a really appealing alternative still, but Burn to Obscurity being able to be pointed at the opponent's face means this removal spell can not only clear the way for your attackers, but also give you the reach needed if the board starts slipping away from you. Great stuff. We'll definitely see this show up, especially in more aggressive red strategies. Dreamswept Duelist is a really strange one. It's 2 and a red for a 3/2 Fairy Noble with First Strike that says creatures you control becoming blocked will cause combat damage triggers on those creatures to go off as if they hit a player or planeswalker. Some important things to get out of the way. Corporate Espionage's ability that works whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player doesn't work with Duelist because it's not an ability of a creature, it's an ability of the enchantment. How about Temperamental Chick's Transform ability? Also doesn't work because it's technically not an ability of that creature, but rather a reflexive trigger on the Amity ability. So if those don't work, what actually does? Well, there's ninjas like Daring Shinobi, stompy tools like Skittertiller, ruins such as Alranta Unleashed and Gelthus, revered triggers like Minraki's, and even funky cases like Dazzling Performer, which grants temporary combat damage triggers to the creatures it affects. Notably, any creature with Trample getting blocked not only triggers its combat damage effect thanks to Duelist, but also still does so on the actual combat damage step, provided it at least tramples over a little bit. So things like Skittertiller, Elronta, and Dazzling Performer can get even extra value if your opponent chooses to block for some reason. Ultimately, though, I think it's best if you view this less as a complex build-around and more as a way to guarantee important combat damage triggers happen if you have some that are particularly important. With so many ninjas having decent combat damage triggers, perhaps that means that what Duelist really wants to do is push ninjas towards playing red. Up next is a pair of 1 and double red clerics that feel like they read as being strong, but don't actually sell me on them that well. Rekindled Seraph's a 2/2 angel cleric with flying, haste, and rapture, so as always, if it dies, it comes back with no abilities and can't block. Additionally, if you control no creatures at the beginning of combat on your turn, you can pay 2 and double red while discarding a card to reanimate it. My gut says that while this feels flashy, it just looks worse than almost every recursive Phoenix in the format right now, and most of those already aren't seeing play. So my hopes are low for Seraph. Evangel of Severed Doubt is a 2/3 human cleric that makes your other clerics into berserkers while granting your berserkers haste. From there, it deals 1 damage to each opponent whenever a berserker you control dies. It feels pretty pointed towards some sort of berserker aristocrats plan, but it just cannot sell me on the idea that the token makers we have for this type are enough to make this particular card amazing. I guess you can play Ragtag Squad naming Cleric and Berserker and use this to kind of get around the Ragtag Squad forcing the types to be split, but I don't know. If you're really going to care about Berserker tokens, let's talk about Gospel of Dominion, another card draw engine in at 2 and a red. It's an enchantment that impulse draws a card from the top of your library whenever a creature you control with no abilities deals combat damage to a player or battle, and that will also let you make a 1/1 red Berserker creature token whenever you play a card from exile. I know I hyped up Eclipse of the Divine, and I do think that battle is really strong, but I think Gospel might not only be a great tool for token decks, but good enough to forcibly resculpt what tokens those decks turn towards. Specifically, I think it's a good reason to finally look away from Ragtag Squad, since it doesn't work with those since those tokens have abilities, whereas new 2-cost token makers like Advance of the Sainted March and Doctrine of Cleansing Flame not only make berserkers like this does, as long as you're making things, you have things that care about berserkers without giving them abilities like the cleric we just talked about, you can have them take advantage of making berserker tokens with Gospel of Dominion as well, and drawing more cards from your deck while making more berserkers. This is a lot of potential card draw, and most of the token cards besides Ragtag Squad already fulfill this mark. The solar tokens from Cliques of Nyland, for instance, also have no abilities. The ones that have haste gain them until end of turn, so they don't trigger Gospel of Dominion for 1 turn, and then from then on, you're fine, and it's really only the one from Sparks of Revolution that's created when Sparks enters, because the backside trigger makes one tapped and attacking, and Flags on High just makes a pair of 1/1s. So there's a lot of things that do good stuff with Gospel of Dominion, and there's very easy ways to make Gospel just good without your anthems interfering at all. With a God Divided heading out the door, I was starting to get very excited about jamming some serious artifact token nonsense again. But it seems my dreams were short-lived. Verdant Radiance is a 2 and a red modal sorcery, either destroying all artifacts with mana value 3 or less, or letting you discard any number of cards to draw that many +1. It's a strong sideboard tool for specific matchups, and it's not embarrassing if you just need to use it to dig to your relevant tools, especially if you're on a strategy with something like Fabricated Anomaly or Reanimation spells to weaponize all those fresh cards in your graveyard. Red keeps its curve low in Exalts of Twiltrie, with our final card in this color being the only 4-drop. Burning Blood Orator is a 4/2 Lizard Cleric with Haste and Rupture, and whenever it attacks, another target creature you control has its base power and toughness also set to 4/2 until end of turn, while gaining Rapture for the time being. This is not an embarrassing Rapture card by any measure. It's stellar for aggressive red strategies leaning on less traditional aggro tools, especially things that generate +1/+1 counters, or otherwise care about their power in some way. Swinging in with this to buff up an Impulsive Underling or a Jorgen Martyr of the Rathomar seems like a recipe to cause your opponent plenty of headaches. And if they block, you get those creatures back with haze counters on them and no abilities. Orator is also just a nice rare case of a Rapture card being good just for its base stats, since it's a 4/2 hasty body, making it easy to send in and threaten with, while understanding that a 4/2 that can't block is still nothing to sneeze at afterwards. The fact that your opponent blocking an Impulsive Underling or Jorgen, even if they're not buffed up at all, forces them to take 4 damage if they kill it, is a real deal problem for them. So I really like these. Let's hop into green, kicking off with probably the biggest deal in this color right out the gates. Let's talk about Huskforger Acolyte. It's a 1-mana 1/1 human artificer and taps for colorless, while also being able to be permanently turned into a 5/5 zombie knight with trample and no other types or abilities. For 4 and double green. Revolution has had a lot of different 2-mana dorks, but this is the first time to my knowledge that the format has ever had a 1-cost mana dork, as part of a founding principle with the format's guidance being that this usually wasn't allowed. Though, with the May rotation came an announcement that the curators were looking at shifting the power of the format a bit, and this was one of the primary ways they had in mind for doing so. Acolyte changes a lot of things, and while I can't confidently say it will single-handedly reshape the format, it's going to see a lot of play. Now, why won't this reshape the format entirely? It's simple. While dorks are typically best in helping you accelerate to a 3-drop on turn 2, being limited to only 4 copies of this card means that you're not guaranteed to have this reliably enough on turn 1 to make it happen. That being said, Acolyte's our first chance of doing so at all, so it's absolutely going to see use here. And there are some very sweet, solid creatures to high roll into. The big ones to me are things like cards and golems, since having an Acolyte on turn 1 plus a Primal Fisher on one of your first 2 turns means your Unflinching Titan comes down ahead of curve while ramping you even further. An Acolyte has decent long-term value in golems by being able to activate your Titans to make golem tokens in a pinch. With the key creatures and golems all having very lenient casting costs, the colorless won't be its biggest liability, so Acolyte seems a shoo-in for that strategy. Beyond golems, it can accelerate sideboard tools like Looming Slyhawk to check the opponent. Mid-range cards like Fabricated Anomaly, Competitive Hedonist can get into play ahead of schedule. Again, I think it'll take a second mana dork for 1 mana to really start reshaping how curves look in the format, but while it's just Acolyte, this still seems like a great way to help you explode out of the gate if you can get it in the opening hand. We've also got another pair of aggressive 1-drops here that weaponize your Coalesced lands and Shock lands. Risen Butcher is a 1/1 for 1 with Death Touch that just enters with a +1/+1 counter if your life total changed in the turn, while Widow's Knight passively gets +1/+1 if your life total changed in the turn, as well as gaining you 1 life whenever it or another zombie or spirit you control enters. These are both reliable 2/2s for 1 thanks to the damage we have hiding away in the mana base, and Widow's Knight is exceptionally exciting as it can both recuperate some of that lost life as well as enable your Vigor effects even without you having to hurt yourself, thanks to Vigor caring equally about pain and gain. Jumping up in mana value, let's talk about graveyards. Reaper of Blossoms is a 2/3 Spirit Druid for 1 and a green that mills 3 cards at your end step, allowing you to pay a green and rebuy a land from your graveyard to your hand, gaining you 1 life if you don't. Advance of Rotten Ruin is a similarly costed 4 defense battle that mills 3 cards and gains you 3 life when it enters, then letting you play land cards from your graveyard when it's defeated. I've been waiting to see if anyone takes Mystic of Returns for a spin, and while it does still have some advantages over these new tools, these are both far less mana-hungry ways to loop your fetch lands, especially since they both contribute to filling your graveyard for other synergies unlike the Mystic. I think Reaper of Blossoms look phenomenal in graveyard decks, and while Advance of Rotten Ruin's a bit harder to justify defeating, given that you want that clause as soon as possible, they both seem reasonably relevant. Purifier of Dawnbloom Grove is a big game changer for decks looking to deal with artifacts and enchantments as a 2/2 elf druid for 2 with Reprieve. When it enters, you destroy an artifact or enchantment, either if it has mana value 1 or less, or if this thing reprieved a creature. This gives Ozon's Blessing decks a 2-in-1 utility tool, as it can either be used to blow up a permanent you want gone, protect a creature you want to control from targeted removal, or do both. Masksmith and Hungry Blob still have their own advantages, but this just feels like it's on another level. Let's talk about another pair of creature bouncing green cards next, and some general ways to turn reprieve effects into additional value. Vow's Reflection is 1 and a green for an enchantment that allows you to return a creature you control to its owner's hand at your end step to draw a card. This gets around reprieve creatures being unable to pick each other up if you need to replay them, and can even do things with threaten effects, letting you steal an opposing creature for the turn before forcing it back to the opponent's hand. There's also Dawnspark Vanguard, a 2-mana 1/1 human scout with reprieve that searches your deck for a land card, either basic or any lands if it reprieved another creature, and put that card into your hand. Vanguard's a lot less exciting, as we have plenty of ways of finding specific non-basics right now, but lack good reasons to actually do so. That being said, reprieve cards and Vow's Reflection have a lot of value with things like Aonuma, that want your creatures to leave without dying or be bounced to your hand, as well as the Rough Riders of Uldun that trigger when they enter and leave play. I can see Vow's Reflection getting some use here and there, though especially if we have great flash creatures to pick up with it, since that'll let us replay the creature on the opponent's turn, and then swing in with it on our turn before we pick them back up. We've got another 2 value-oriented 2-mana battles here, and I'm going to take this time to also mention an interaction that I've been trying to find a good opportunity to bring up. Advance of the Empty Throne starts at 4 defense and returns a non-battle permanent card from your graveyard to your hand on enter. Once defeated, it has a landfall ability to make a soldier token. It's not astonishingly strong, but it's decent if you need recursion. Gravebound Oath, meanwhile, starts at 5 defense and lets you play with the top card of your library revealed. You can play lands from there once it's down to 3 defense, and creatures as well when it's defeated. Additionally, once Oath is defeated, any spells you cast from somewhere besides your hand also cost 2 less, meaning creatures on the top come much faster, and you can also get some value from things like flashback spells in your graveyard. I think Gravebound Oath is fine, but not format shaking by any means, due to the challenges with defeating it, especially with how little it does on its own. Primary exciting note here is something I've saved for a while, in Pinnacle of Progress, one of my big Cliques of Nylon predictions that didn't quite pan out. It's absolutely enamored by battles that start at 5 defense, since that's immediately giving you the full discount for that eye horror. Now, is a 5/5 with Ward 2 worth gambling on finding one of these battles and getting it out into play quickly? That's for you to decide. I'm not sure if I'm actually going to take it for a spin at this point. Following up those battles are a pair of aggressive 2-drop creatures that can help to defeat them. Banner Breaker's built for that job as a 3/1 zombie soldier with trample and a combat damage trigger on players, I should say, to deal the same amount of damage to a battle that player protects. Swinging at the opponent while also clearing your battles can be really handy, so if you're on an aggressive leaning strategy that has battles it's invested in clearing, this could be a worthwhile card to consider. Dawnveil Infiltrator can also be a 3-power trampler, though this human soldier rogue starts out as a 2/2 and requires you to cast a second spell in a turn to start scaling it up. Green aggressive decks, especially ones dipping into red for the suite of cheap combat tricks, can hope to trigger this at least once or twice, and if you can make that alone happen, it's already a 2-mana 4/4 trampler, which is a good reward for your effort. This one's probably not amazing, but it's worth at least talking about. Hopeborn Veteran's a 4/3 with trample for 2, and it returns to your hand at the end step if it didn't enter this turn. So you play it, wait, attack and bounce, play it, wait, attack and bounce. Dealing 4 damage every other turn leaves it feeling no different than a 2/3 in terms of its potential as a clock, though at the very least 4/3 attacks a lot better than a 2/3 that stays in play forever. The best use I can think of this is maybe getting it into play off of an Ozon's Blessing on the opposing turn to swing in without having to wait around with it on the table for a turn cycle, but maybe it's just better if you have a haste effect like that red battle from earlier. For 4 months now, we've been leaning on Shigane Manor Burns as a reliable turn 2 play to jump us up to 4 mana on turn 3 without exposing your ramp to creature removal like a mana dork would be vulnerable to. Now, Ring of Promised Vows just kinda does it more smoothly, being able to weave into your turn pretty effortlessly if the mana it makes can be used immediately. It's 1 and a green as an artifact that taps for green, making the spell you spend that mana on uncounterable if that's your second spell of the turn. We got plenty of great 4-drops in the field, and even just as a baseline, this comes down on turn 2 and immediately makes you mana for something small like a Root Fossil or the previously praised Huskforger Acolyte. Whether you're ramping up to big things that you need to have resolve or just want to slam the 4-drop into play ahead of schedule more reliably, Ring of Promised Vows actually gets you there pretty consistently. Redeemer of Hallowed Flesh is a stellar stompy tool, coming in at 2 and a green as a 3/3 human soldier with Ward 2. Not only does this make it wear +1/+1 counters and other buffs well, not only is there a 1 mana dork that can get this into play turn 2, it also has a combat damage trigger, not combat damage trigger, it has a start of combat trigger, forcing an opponent to exile a card from their graveyard. You get a 1/1 white soldier if they exile a creature, a treasure if they exile a land, and if you don't make a token this way, it gets a +1/+1 counter. If I understand this right, not only do you get a counter if they exile a non-creature, non-land card, you also get a counter if they have nothing to discard, and if they have something like a Psyhawk in play to stop you from making the token. So this will be getting counters very often. A lot of our creatures that hate on the graveyard are probably more consistent at picking apart graveyards, with Corpse Pyre Fiends doing so repeatedly and Masksmith at least offering a single target exile, but Redeemer is less of a strict graveyard hate card and more of a stompy champion, with incidental pressure on a resource that cards like Fabricated Anomaly are already putting pressure on for your opponent's side. We've got another pair of soldier-related cards here, starting out with Angel-Bound Warden. It's another 2 and a green soldier with Ward 2, and while that might look like a 2/2, it gets a +1/+1 counter whenever it or another soldier enters, so it's also really a 3/3 that starts scaling for 3 mana with Ward 2. It also has a trigger that lets you move its counters over to angels when they enter, but realistically, this is just a stompy scaling 3-drop that is potentially a good alternative to Redeemer, depending on how you feel about that card. I think if you care more about soldiers, this sees play over Redeemer, but they're both soldiers, so you probably just play them both. Commander of the Vow, meanwhile, is actually a human cleric, starting as a 1/1 for 1 and double green, though it makes a pair of soldier tokens when it enters. From there, it gets a +1/+1 counter whenever a token you control deals combat damage to a player, making it scale quickly if left unchecked. Though it is ultimately just a bundle of stats. I think both of these are solid, and I could see either or both getting some experimentation, but I also wouldn't be stunned to find that neither of these actually make many waves. One last soldier token maker at 3 mana, and this one's a doozy. Faithline Marshal is 2 and a green for a 2/2 human cleric with flash and 3 spellcasting triggers. Makes a 1/1 soldier when you cast your first spell each turn, a tapped everywhere land token that's all basic types on your second spell each turn, and giving your creatures a temporary +1/+1 buff on the third spell each turn. Realistically, I think even just the 1/1 token each turn is decent, but the everywhere tokens, that's what has my attention right now. It's pure mana fixing, and we have some real ways to copy up tokens as you make them right now. One of Kitsuo's primary themes in White and Blue was token copying, and between Hyomon and Absolution Flock, there's a couple of ways to copy everywhere tokens once you've got one in play. And little spoilers, not only did I deliberately leave a card out from this list for the next slide, but there's also a pair of cards in blue and red that we'll get to for more everywhere token nonsense in the multicolor section. Okay, let's talk about Equanimity and everywhere tokens a little more now, specifically talking about Scour the Crown lands. It's a 2 and a green sorcery with 2 separate token-making claws, first making a tapped everywhere token, and then making an untapped 2/2 zombie that can't block. The reason it's important that these are separate for our discussion is that Equanimity can replace the creation of one token with the creation of another, and because these tokens are made sequentially and not technically together, you can actually have the zombie be an untapped copy of the Everywhere token, even if this is the first Everywhere token you've made. Equanimity is already attempting to include in any deck that cares about Everywhere lands, because it can just copy them with its innate attack trigger. But when you can also do cool tricks like turn Scour into a 3-mana explosive vegetations, that's enough to sell me on the notion that Everywhere Ramp could be a real deal strategy, if a little unreliable. 2 more 3-drops to cover here, and they're both decent but not game-changing. The better of these two is our final battle, Clash at Dawnbloom Grove, starting at 4 defense and destroying a non-creature non-land permanent when it enters. From there, taking away 2 defense makes a pair of the unblocking zombie tokens, and defeating it just gives your creatures trample for the rest of the game. I'll be honest, the 2/2 zombies that can't block do not excite me, and I don't know if you even care to hit this since the real value is just in it being a 3-mana removal spell in green. Though, at the very least, if you do bother to defeat it, it makes your attackers a lot more annoying for opposing small boards. Dreadchant Warcaller has similar problems for me as a 3/2 human shaman with Ward 1 that makes one of those zombies at your end step on a Vigor Clause. This can at least make a token every turn in perpetuity, and it's decently reliable to have that happen, as is true of most Vigor effects, but I can't muster much excitement about it. Up next is Vestige of the King's Fall, and this one, well, I don't have a whole lot to say. I do have a lot of excitement for it. This card's just strong, plain and simple. It's a 5/5 Beast Spirit for 2 and double green with Trample and Trample over battles, meaning it can be used to pressure battles with the knowledge that excess damage will still always go to the opponent when you need it to, thus making it one of the better ways of clearing battles. It also has a Vigor Clause, letting you cast it from your graveyard at your end step if your life total changed that turn. So, you just use a coalesced land to cast something else in the turn and then cast it for 4, or you shock in a shock land and end your turn and cast it for your 4 mana that you have up right now if you somehow get it into your graveyard before you play your 4th land. This is just good. This is just really good. Stand in Unison's a bit expensive, but there's some real appeal here. It's 3 and a green for another enchantment that lets you pick up a creature at your end step, though this one won't draw you cards. In exchange for paying twice as much as Vow's Reflection asks you to, instead of the card draw you get an enter trigger doubler for your creatures, meaning any key tempo effects go off twice. I think there's real conversation to be had about how good Frog of Eternal Gloom and Preemption Daemon work together to fight well for the board. And with Stand in Unison, they do so even more effectively while being easy to justify picking up with, since they just get cast again on the opponent's end step or sooner if they push you to. I think a deck that wants these wants Vow Reflection a little more, but I could totally see Vow being so important that you're willing to run a single Stand in Unison just for a 5th instance of this effect. Especially with this piling up your enter triggers. Groveborn Envoy is another simple one. 2 and a double green Centaur Druid Soldier with stats equal to the number of lands you control. When it dies, you replace it with a tapped Everywhere token, but otherwise it's just a big clunky stat bomb. I'm giving it time mostly for that enter trigger, but this is probably my least favorite way to make an Everywhere token. Oh my god, y'all, it happened. We got Spirit Realm Phoenix back. Let's go! Dawnhorn Survivor is a 4/3 elf soldier survivor for 3 and a green with Trample, and whenever you cast your second creature spell each turn, you can return the survivor from your graveyard to your hand. Realistically, though, that triggers the only thing here that matters. You're never planning to cast it, so its stat line and type line are kind of just irrelevant. It's just the fact that it has Trample. I was willing to bend over backwards and shove some pretty subpar +1/+1 counter synergies into a deck with Ignited Soul, Calamity Cat, and Fabricated Anomaly in the name of discarding and rebuying Spirit Realm Phoenix every turn. And yes, I'm going to go out on a limb and say, I think some of those +1/+1 counter cards were the weakest link in that deck. Now we have Survivor saying that rather than you having to put a +1/+1 counter on something to get it back at the end step, you just have to cast a second spell. You just cast 2 creatures, which could happen even before combat, allowing you to then discard this to a Calamity Cat before you swing, or to an Ignited Soul on combat damage. Given all of this, I would not be surprised to see this card get changed before rotation, But if it doesn't, I'm gonna be playing some more Looter Stompy, and there's gonna be a playset of Dawnsworn Survivors in my deck, and I am gonna be very content never once casting this card. Paragon of Sacred Bellows feels tricky for me to judge, but I do like what I see. It's a 5/5 Elephant Soldier for 3 and double green with Reprieve. It puts a +1/+1 counter on each other creature you control when it enters, regardless of if it reprieved anything, though if you did, it then gives itself and your other creatures trample and haste for the turn. It's a nice bit of lethality for token decks, but the card itself feels more like a mid-range tool, so I'm not quite sure what deck wants this. I know Arasta's Handmaiden and Vasilisa have been decent 5-drops in mono green Stompy, so maybe this just kills people fast enough for it to be worthwhile. I'm gonna have to really get provocative thoughts on these at least. Dawnhoof Behemoth's really simple. It's a 5/5 Ox with Vigilance and Reach for 5, but it costs 2 less if it's not your first spell in the turn. I don't think it'll see play. I don't think Pinnacle of Progress will see play, and that's often just going to be a 2-mana 5/5 at this point, so yeah. Anyways, Banners Unbroken seems pretty bad, right? It's probably unplayable, but there's a tiny, infinitely small glimmer in my mind screaming that this could end the game the turn you play it, and you could probably play it for 2 really reliably, and it's all because Radiant Devotee has rotted my brain. It's a 6 and double green sorcery that costs 2 less for each angel you control, and gives your creatures +1/+1 for the turn for each soldier you control. Now you're probably thinking that Radiant Devotee accelerating out a bunch of 4 and 5 cost angels doesn't really meaningfully do anything to cost reduce this massive spell, but here's where my mind has been melting. We have 2 different single white mana 1/1 flying angels in the format right now, plus Ragtag Squad to make both a soldier and an angel token. The angel can have haste to trigger Devotee's untap clause for your soldiers. That's 12 cheap angels effectively, on top of any other cards we can squeeze in like Aegis of Grace or Dawn Hymn Herald, which are both still going to be solid because Devotee and Banners Unbroken both mean we're going to want to run cheap soldiers anyways. Oh, and did I mention that Ambitious Angel, the 1 mana 1/1 flying angel that's not from this set but from Errors in the Weft? Yeah, that's a soldier as well, tying together both halves of Banners Unbroken and Radiant Devotee, meaning that on turn 2, you can cast Radiant Devotee, immediately use it to convoke out an Ambitious Angel, immediately convoke out another Ambitious Angel, and repeat this until you've played all of them, and then end on a Softlight Harmonist if you've got it. And maybe you use the Softlight Harmonist to just pick up an Ambitious Angel and put a counter on one of your things. And if you had an angel in play on turn 1, you can swing in with it, untap Devotee and every Ambitious Angel to convoke out one of your larger angels immediately. Do I think this strategy needs Banners Unbroken? Not necessarily. I think this is a crazy fast blitz deck in terms of building a board state swiftly and rushing out a giant angel. That being said, with all of the things you can put into play really quickly, Banners Unbroken can actually be stunningly cheap with the right tools, and probably kills the opponent if you're casting it. And don't go assuming Devotee's not reliable enough to plan for, because Ozon's Blessing exists to find it. I think this will be a really tricky and precarious deck to try and build in the right configuration to make it work perfectly. But if this gets into the format unpatched, I am brewing the hell out of this heaven. Our final 2 green cards are very high cost and care about you having either a very high or very low life total. Omnipresence is the simpler of the 2. It's 6 and triple green for an enchantment that makes your life totals have base power and toughness equal to your life total. Kills pretty fast, but comes out oppressively slowly, so just won't see play. Ossian the Crown's Shadow, meanwhile, is also probably not going to get played, at least anytime soon, but has some cute things we can at least talk about. It's our highest mana value card in the format's history, as a 15 and a green, 9/9 legendary beast spirit with trample, vigilance, and reach. It gives you hexproof, and it costs less for each point of life you have below your starting life total. So at 5 or less life, this is just a 1-drop. Granted, while green and black do have a lot of ways to rush down your life total in this set, they aren't so amazing as to get this out quickly and reliably, especially since this just folds to a lot of cheap removal, and then you just die. Now, the real reason I'm mentioning it is for the handful of silly high mana value cards matters that we have. Rejuvenation Station with Ossian in play gains you 16 life and lets you put 2 creature, enchantment, and or land cards from the top 16 cards of your deck into your hand. effectively making it so your Osine didn't actually cost you a bunch of time losing a bunch of life, and you actually go from 5 roughly to 21 roughly. Zaya Record Chaser sets her stats to 16/16 when you cast Osine. It also makes a treasure token to recoup the potential 1 mana you spent on it. Keon Hope Exec can reveal Osine to gain you 16 life, plus the mana value of whatever else she's revealing, before taking away 7 of it. Finally, if you can cast Osine for cheap with a Zuhan's Lotus in play, the Lotus can immediately sacrifice Osine for 17 green mana. Are any of these uses good? Probably not. Maybe Rejuvenation Station if you can really bend a deck backwards to make it work. But I think you can just cast Osine more reliably than you might expect. That being said, it's a cute card for us to keep in mind as any new high mana value payoffs arrive in future rotations. And there are at least a couple other cards we'll get to down the line that are high cost and could benefit from Rejuvenation Station. You know I love me some cost-reducing idiots. We've made it to Multicolor, folks, and we're kicking it off with the start of a cycle. Siddraith Charm is the first of 5 2-color 2-mana charms, all coming in at instant speed and with 3 modes to choose from. This blue and black instant either scries 2 and draws a card, counters an instant or sorcery spell, or taps a non-land permanent and stuns it. There's not much more to be said. It's not the most powerful of tools, but it's pretty reasonable as a sideboard card, and with it being a cantrip in the worst case scenarios, it's not embarrassing to run in the main deck. Also countering a spell for a blue and a black is Destructive Ambition, another instant that counters a monocolored spell this time while making its controller lose 2 life. If you're really looking for a blue and a black counterspell, this is actually a lot more reliable, as a lot of the bigger haymakers in our format right now are monocolored, and it doesn't look like that'll be seriously changing anytime soon. It'll miss on things here and there, but our Grand Prix are open deck list, so you can know exactly what this does and doesn't hit going into each of your matches. I'd imagine if multicolor cards like AO rule the early days of rotation, this will probably drift into sideboards, but I think it's going to be crazy if people just don't run it at all. I think it's worthwhile. We immediately get another simple card. Scornful Hexmistress is a 2/1 human warlock for 1 of each color and menace and prowess. I don't think a prowess deck will want or need this. I don't think a prowess deck in these colors is even really going to see play. But it's a cheap warlock for the 4-mana card that just wants to put Exorcist of Errors into play instead. We've arrived at long last to our first Planeswalker, Casimier's Bound in Flesh. I think I'm saying that right. A 1 blue and black 4 loyalty transforming Planeswalker with 2 loyalty abilities on each side. His front side can +1 to draw a card or -2 to have target player sacrifice a creature or planeswalker, with an important note that whenever you activate one of the loyalty abilities of his front face, you do have to discard a card or sacrifice a permanent. Once you do so, the option to transform him arises if you have 4 or more card types among cards in your graveyard, transforming him into He Who Shed His Death, with similar loyalty abilities to the front face but turned up a notch. Now, the +1 has become a +2 to draw 2 cards instead of 1, and the -2 moves from an edict to destroying a creature or planeswalker you target while having its controller discard a card. And of course, you won't have to discard or sacrifice anything to activate him then. The wrinkle is that getting this powerful transformed side has a real risk, with Casimier's new death trigger. If He Who Shed His Death is put into your graveyard from play while transformed without being sacrificed, you must return him back to the battlefield to his transformed side with his 4 starting loyalty, and then you're forced to lose half of your life total, rounded up. What this means in practice is that Casimier's, once transformed, cannot be pulled off your battlefield for good unless you deliberately find a way to sacrifice him, and your opponent receives an alternate win condition in the form of consistently and reliably removing He Who Shed His Death over and over to cut your life total into pieces, until their board state is strong enough to kill you with ease. The card draw, removal, and discard all on that backside help stave off this alternate angle of attack, but it's definitely a gamble to flip him, to the point where I could see cases for just keeping Casimier's on his front side and using that triggered ability to just line your graveyard with utility things from your hand. One last thing to note is that if you have Casimier's transformed, you can put another copy into play on the front face, and they won't legend rule each other. Just be really careful to not transform that second copy of Casimier's, as a legendary permanent dying to the legend rule isn't being counted as sacrificed. So if you wind up with 2 copies of He Who Shed His Death in play, and neither of them get to shed the legendary typing or the legend rule, one will be forced to legend rule the other out of play and then return it to the battlefield while having your life total rounded up, eventually snowballing into you dying immediately. Tread carefully and use his power responsibly, or you will pay the consequences. Shared in Shadow is another simpler card, but it's at least got a nice bonus compared to most of its competition. That's right, it's a Warlock token-making spell, making a pair of 1/1 Warlocks with prowess at instant speed for 3 mana, and being able to be flashed back for 5. There's a These Can't Block clause that you probably come to expect for a lot of the instant speed token makers in this set, but the tokens can actually block if this is cast from your hand, which is especially nice if you're holding up other tricks to help those prowess tokens scale to check your opponent's board more effectively. As always, I don't think a lot of the incentives to push your board wide with Warlocks are worth your time, but this is at least a cute combat trick, and it's 4 bodies across 2 casts of a single card. If anything's going to put the prowess tokens on the map in this set, it's probably this card. Trauma Spike's a new extraction effect, and actually a reprint from a card over in Magic Set Editor Modern, Revolution's sister format. This is perfectly timed with Forget Their Names entering its sunset season, and even while we still have it, Trauma Spike has a pretty clear upside in comparison, because it doesn't have to target a card in a graveyard. Spike is 1 a blue and a black for a sorcery that lets you choose a non-land card name, searching target player's graveyard, hand, and library for any number of cards with that name to exile all of them, with the catch that you have to discard a card for each card you exiled from their hand. It's a pretty reasonable drawback, and honestly, if you have synergies with things that you might want to discard, it just even gets better. It's a solid mid-range and control tool, perfect for checking combo pieces and particularly devastating threats from the opponent. And most effects before the, and like most effects before this, the counterplay can just be aggro them out. It's worth noting as well that the only other time we've had an effect like this was in Secrets of the River Cities. I always get that name mixed up. Secrets of the River Cities, which was also designed by Zangy, and the set that this is being reprinted from in MSCM is another set designed by Zangy, so we can always trust Zangy to give us anti-combo cards. Guild Chant Transmuter is a tempting mana engine for Storm decks, but I mostly have it here because it's a Warlock that makes an artifact for 3 become 1. Again, don't think bending over backwards for that condition is actually worth it, but it's at least worth mentioning, because then you just need a 3-power creature with flying to get it to be fully fulfilled. Otherwise, Transmuter is a 2/1 Warlock for 3 that makes a tapped treasure whenever you cast a non-creature spell and changes the mana ability of your treasures to prevent them from being used for creature spells. This can be pretty solid, especially for tools like sustainable investments, which already aren't creatures. And if I understand correctly, in investments that you play after Guild Chant Transmuter will override Transmuter removing abilities from your treasures because of timestamps. So you still get to use the tap without sacrificing clause of sustainable investments and use it to cast creatures. This all being said, treasure decks really fell off after September of last year, and even with all of the support in Kitsuo, it really didn't move the needle a whole lot, so I'm not really holding my breath here. Gwenera of Frosted Grace is a 3-mana 2/3 elf warlock with flash and an end-step trigger on every turn, just to get a card from the top 3 of your deck into your hand if you spent 4 more mana on instants and sorceries in the turn. It's not awful, but the 4 or more mana on spells cards just continue to underwhelm me, especially since they don't count other non-creature spell types. If your deck cares about it, this is a solid draw engine, but it's only really breaking even on cards when you're casting a single 4-mana spell every turn, because if you have to cast multiple spells to meet that condition, you're still going down on cards to make Gwenera's condition be met. And if you are spending a 4 mana on a spell every turn, that's a whole lot of mana to just kind of have a 2/3 sit around and look pretty. Again, I wish I could be more enthusiastic here. In case you were thinking of it at the top of this review when I mentioned that this set was using Kitsuo as a framework, yeah, the second half of the 2-color villainy cycle is here too. Unfortunately, Witchery seems really rough. It's a blue, a black, and 1 of either for an enchantment that functionally gives your creatures prowess, since it buffs them all by +1/+1 whenever you cast a non-creature spell, and then it makes a 4/4 horror at each end step if you've spent 4 or more mana on instants and sorceries. This, of all the payoffs for the cards that care about 4+ mana on spells, stings me the most that it doesn't count other non-creature spells, because it means that this is just a 3 mana do nothing most of the time you play it. There's no way for you to have it make a token the turn it comes in, unless you're specifically cheating it in with a full cost 3 become 1 or the adventure on Aunuma's students. Now, to give this card credit, I do think those use cases are actually pretty solid. And while we've had Majesty previously to make 4/3s whenever you cast a spell with mana value 4 or greater, even if that spell's being discounted, that couldn't actually trigger when you put it in off of spells like 3 become 1 and Infiltration. Do I think you run this if you're on 3 become 1 and Infiltration? I'll give a very heavy, very hesitant maybe, because this is kind of awful to be hard casting, but there is at least real value to be had, just with the requirement that you play really good cards to make this really bad card look kind of okay. Anyways, Sealed Sigil Adept is a 4/2 for 4 that cantrips and loses you 1 life when it enters, or you chant it for a blue or a black. Just run a card that's worth the slot on its own. This is probably not worth your time. Maybe with the blue rare that lets you chant with your creatures in play, but probably not. Now this is a Warlock Haymaker. Ceridwen, I have that misspelled on my script, at least the first time I say it. Ceridwen Matron is a 4/4 legendary angel warlock for double blue and double black with flying prowess, and a trigger when you cast an instant or sorcery from your hand to exile one with lesser mana value from your graveyard, copying that spell and letting you cast it for free. This is the first of a cycle of double pipped 4-drops that we have, and we've had a very similar card like this in the field before, in Tigal, Guru of Dagiri, all the way back with Kutalia from the original Revolution season. And for the cost of 2 black over 2 generic, you do get an additional point of power, evasion, and prowess from the equation. Granted, I don't think Tigal did a lot in his day besides a decent Izzet Control League run from September 2021 in the hands of Cool Beans, but I do remember thinking that the card was incredibly good on the surface, and I feel like I have memories of him putting in some serious work in days prior to Revolution's existence. Anyways, Ceridwen has some great spells to cast here in the current format, and with all of the different ways to funnel cards into your graveyard for a benefit, it's easy to see how this angel can both spring you ahead on resources and value while just beating your opponent across the face for 6 or 8 damage on every attack. Just think, your cost-reduced instant speed draw spell can recast a hand attack spell or a counter spell on the opponent's turn just for having this 4/4 in play. The big challenge is, of course, going to be finding time to tap out for it, but I think if you can get Ceridwen in play, you're going to be taking a pretty smooth route forward. Stag of the Broken Crown is fairly underwhelming in comparison, but I do think there are a lot of good things to talk about here. It's a 6 mana 6/6 Elk Horror with Flash that can't be countered, as well as having Ward 3 and a clause to have it enter tapped if you cast it from exile, meaning it can block if you cast it from your hand. Casting from exile may happen here and there, though its chance does have some real value, costing 1 of each blue and black to make your next instant sorcery you put it on have Flash and uncounterable. I think the clause isn't necessary for this card to see play, so you can absolutely just play this from your hand for 6. That Flash clause is mostly just interesting for the sake of giving a sorcery the ability to be played on your opponent's turn, probably hand attack, but the uncounterable clause can be nice to sneak a key spell onto the stack through opposing interaction. Factor in that this is just an annoying 6/6 with Flash and Ward 3, I can actually see it seeing play here and there as an anti-control tool for control mirrors. Not super powerful, but I initially was ready to just write this off and not even mention it, so I'm glad I gave this the time of day to really weigh it. This is a little backwards. Let's go to this. Oh no. Weird. I have some issues here. All right. This is what I get for animating elements of slides. 150 odd slides into a 200 slide PowerPoint. Last up in blue and black is the Ever-Gnashing Dark, an 8 mana 10/10 trampling demigod horror with a very wild combat damage trigger, if you can get it into play fast enough. Its combat damage trigger, which can also be chanted onto an instant or sorcery for 1 double blue and double black, gives you an extra turn if it's not already one. Now, I personally don't think this has a chance in hell of seeing play in the current rotation. Definitely not for its chant cost, though If you really want to try and strain things, chanting this onto a spell does mean that if you copy that spell, you do pile up the extra turns, since it's only checking if it's not currently an extra turn, to my understanding anyways. But put simply, I think there are a lot of reanimation targets with more immediacy. And the best argument in favor of this is that Left Dancer eating this gives you a 4-3 with Trample, Flying, and Death Touch to almost always guarantee the combat damage trigger, which is appealing, but it really could use Haste to make it a really viable option compared to the others. Speaking of cheating into play Haste, let's deal with this slideshow being a little broken. Let's talk about Rev Eternal, where we have the Whisper of Eltenzia and Wild Encounter to put this into play and allow you to swing with it immediately as soon as you hit 5 mana. The Whisper will require you to have sacrificed or otherwise had something leave play to actually get mana from her enter trigger to play this on turn 4. If you can make that happen, though, Evergnashing Dark gets to hit the opponent for 10, give you another turn, and thus spend that extra turn either digging for interaction to stall your opponent for another cheat, or just already cheat a second big Haymaker to kill on that extra turn. Wild Encounter was pretty undertested during the last Eternal month to my memory, so I'll be interested to see if Evergnashing Dark gives that deck a bit more punch. And hey, maybe I'm underrating how good this could be to reanimate. Let's move forward. Let's kick off a new color pair with a new charm. Lunate's Charm is a green and a white for an instant that gives your opponent's that either gives your permanents hexproof for a turn, exiles a creature with power 5 or greater, or shuffles a player's graveyard to the bottom of their library. It's probably the least exciting of the charms for me, but it could see a bit of play. I'm just not anticipating it doing a whole lot. If you're really desperate for something that both protects one of your permanents on board and can act as graveyard hate, this could do some decent things. But I don't think that removal mode will ever come up reliably, and I think the removal mode needs to be good for this to be really good. Lunate Prowl Warden's up next, a 2/2 Cat Soldier for 2 with Flash and Reprieve. Not much to say. This could be decent, but unfortunately Ozon's Blessing means that every other 2-mana Reprieve creature functionally also has Flash, so if you really want to use this to save something, you're probably just playing an Ozon's Blessing deck instead. Rite of Harmony is the second piece of our reprint cycle, one of 3 from canon sets. It's a 2-mana instant that draws you a card whenever a creature or enchantment enters under your control this turn, flashing back for 2 more mana. The number of mass token generation effects we have to really get the cards flowing here are pretty few and far between. Best one I can think of is Lost Resistor, whose Cyber Soul cost of white and double X makes X 3/1 cyborgs, meaning you also draw X cards in the process. But I think there are other ways to make a lot of tokens as well, but I think for the most part this is just not something I anticipate as shaking up Constructed in any major fashion. Enduring Vow Holder's kind of in the same boat as Rite of Harmony, but it persisting in play does at least help a bit. It's a 1/1 Human Soldier for 2. Whenever another creature you control enters, this gets a +1/+1 counter, and you draw a card if this resolves a 3rd time in a turn. Making 3 tokens in a turn isn't trivial right now, even with all the new goodies in this set, but having 3 creatures come into play could be worthwhile for card draw, and this thing does scale up really fast. But I think we're going to get to another card in just a second here that does what I think does this similar thing a lot better. Meet Syra, Blade of Memory. A 3-mana 2/3 human soldier that gains you 1 life whenever it or another creature you control enters. Unlike Vow Holder, this draws a card the second time it triggers while counting itself up to that total. And on the 3rd trigger, rather than putting a counter on itself, you get a counter on all of your creatures. Pair Syra with things that have repeatable token generation, like some of the better battles in this set, and you'll probably start snowballing really fast. I don't want to call this a mandatory include in token decks, because ultimately it's pretty hard to compete with AO if you're leaning towards Naya, but the value on offer here is pretty stellar. Also looking really solid is Rosen, Clad in Guilt. It's a 3/3 elf soldier for 3 with Ward X, where X is the number of counters on it. That makes your second spell each turn cost 2 less to cast, and puts a +1/+1 counter on itself whenever you cast a spell. This is a rapidly scaling threat that quickly becomes untouchable by targeted removal while cheating your mana. Whether you play it on curve into a Ley Shard or some other 2-mana artifact, or on turn 4 backed up by Banishing Light, or something like Zeno to both continue building the board pressure while leveraging the counters it generates. For not having any inherent keywords besides Word, I feel like this is a trample counter or some other similar effect away from just murdering your opponent before they get time to blink. It's a solid mid-range tool, probably also a great stompy tool. I gotta imagine that there's some gross things you can do with this. Soft Step Vowkeeper is less remarkable, but can still do some cool things. It's a 3/3 for 3 with Ward 1 that flickers one of your other creatures whenever you cast your second spell in a turn. Clunky, but if you can find cheap enough spells to sling, card draw, keep this fueled, and things worth flickering, maybe it could do some work. Harmony is our next villainy cycle enchantment, coming in for a green, a white, and one of either, with the usual 2 triggers. One firing off once each turn when a creature enters, so long as 2 or more creatures have entered in the turn, to put +1/+1 counters on your full board, while the other trigger is on attack to draw you a card if you're swinging at least 8 total power. This has all of the same synergies as most of the other big token tools in the set, and the only knock against it is that I think the number of playables for this kind of avenue of attack are starting to get really competitive, to the point where I don't even think these decks want to stay in Naya, and they might want to split into either green-white or red-white. So I don't know if this can hold up to the competition. Sanctified Cartographies are final everywhere token maker, making one when it enters for 3 mana, and forcing itself back to your hand whenever one of your creatures leaves play without dying. It's a touch overcosted in terms of its role as ramp, but it's flickerable ramp thanks to Brief Stop, and it's probably the best way to put Everywhere tokens into play for equanimity. Granted, I'm not 100% sure that Everywhere tokens can go the distance, but making and spamming these tokens definitely sounds like fun, especially since it opens the door for some weird splashes with the tokens making colors, any color of mana. Arian, the Last Light, is a 3/4 Demigod Angel for double green and double white with flash, flying, lifelink, and a once-a-turn triggered ability upon having another creature you control leave play, without dying, to untap up to 3 lands. It's a solid ambush blocker and solid attacker, and the mana advantage here can be pretty sweet when used alongside other cheap reprieve creatures or just effects that let you bounce things. Pretty simple compared to some other mythics, but simple can be great, to the point where I almost wonder if you're willing to bend over backwards for that big white Soldier and Angel Blitz deck to try and find some green soldiers to just convoke this out more reliably. Legacy Denied is a 4-mana sorcery speed fight spell that gives your creatures +1/+1 and lifelink before it fights, and it costs 2 less if it's not your first spell in the turn. It's really just here because I want you to remember Charity Match still exists. Play Charity Match. It gives lifelink permanently, and if the creature already had lifelink, it gives a +1/+1 counter instead, and this also is an instant instead of a sorcery. Always 2 mana. Play Charity Match. Charity Match is really good. If you're really desperate for this effect, Charity Match is premier. Choir Ascendant is kind of funny, and we have talked about how great the means of cheating out angels is right now, so it could see play in that shell, but I can't say with certainty if I believe in it. It's a 6-mana 4/4 Angel Bard with flying and triple reprieve, letting you pick up anywhere from 0 to 3 creatures without reprieve, and then making that many 4/4 flying angel tokens on enter. I think there's something cool about using a green soldier token from Ragtag Squad alongside a bunch of ambitious angels, radiant devotees, and other soldier tokens to convoke this into play for cheap, and then just pick up a bunch of those ambitious angels just to promptly redeploy them for while building a swarm of 4/4 flyers. But it might just cost a little too much for this ability to be truly amazing. If Devotee and Ambitious Angel stay as is when the rotation hits, I'll probably give Choir Ascendant a try in the shell, but I'm not expecting a miracle. Green White's been moving really aggressive, but let's talk about something slower. Our next Planeswalker is the last Green White card for us to talk about here, Sylvia the Rewoven Oath. She starts at 5 loyalty and has Flash, letting you activate her abilities at instant speed the turn she enters. Her +2 untaps up to 3 permanents and gains you 3 life, untapping a bunch of blockers in the middle of combat, or untapping a bunch of tapped creatures to become blockers in the middle of combat, or untapping a bunch of lands to let you cast another spell. While her -2 makes a 4/4 Flying Angel, and her -4 clears all but the highest power creature from each player's board. She's a solid enough instant speed board wipe, letting you stick some random token in front of the biggest opposing creature before flashing her in to nuke the board and blank the attacker with the blocker that's gone, and then follow up the following turn with presumably a removal spell for the surviving creature your opponent has. Solid mid-range tool, solid control tool. If you're moving slower at all in green and white, you're probably going to want to reach for Sylvia. From one Planeswalker to the next, and from 6 mana all the way back down to 2, we have our first 2 mana Planeswalker in the format, to my knowledge, Aldegar of Path Unwoven. He's a single blue and a single red for a 3 starting loyalty Planeswalker, ticking up by 1 to discard and draw, or ticking down by 3 to deal 3 to any target. Aldegar also has a 0 ability, though it doesn't function without him being at 6 or more loyalty. Once you do get there, if it resolves, he permanently becomes a 5/5 blue and red dragon creature with indestructible and flying, retaining his loyalty abilities, but losing the ability to be attacked or die for running out of loyalty because he stops being a planeswalker. Fold in an additional bonus that his uptick just draws you a card if your hand's empty, and this is a solid 2 mana spell. Worst comes to worst, it's a 2 mana deal 3 directly to the opponent, and that's all you really need sometimes. Cloudveil Courier has me very intrigued. It's a 2/2 for 2 Fairy Knight with Menace that also gives Menace to all of your other creature tokens. Now, I've gone on record before, pretty publicly, as having said that of the +1/+1 counter matters elements of the red-green Looter Stompy deck, I thought Kieran of Boons was actually the most powerful card in that deck. And I think the only reason it never got a nerf is just that the counter synergies around it are pretty lackluster. In that same regard, forcing your opponents to double block each of your little 1/1 tokens suddenly means a lot of your 1/1s are swinging through when they normally wouldn't. I don't think it's quite to the level of Kieran of Boons by any measure, but anything that grants mass evasion for cheap is going to catch my eye in the wake of my experience with Kieran. Sweeten the Deal is a simple 2 mana discard a card to draw 2, but it has an interesting line of text letting it gain flashback if an opponent lost life in a turn. Recurring Visions has been looking for homes since its buff back in March, and Blistering Cryo Phoenix has also shown up here and there, but both of these cards still feel like they're desperate for some sort of additional value or lethality. Sweeten the Deal could be the value component that's missing, but with Industrialize already around, I can't say I'm super confident in that statement. Took a second to get here, but Thistral Charms are next in the charm cycle. It's one of each blue and red, and either deals 3 damage to a creature or battle, counters a non-creature permanent spell, or creates a token copy of a token you control. Now, the first 2 modes are really easy to parse. Kill a creature, defeat a battle, counter an artifact, battle, enchantment, or planeswalker. It's that last mode that's worth spending a bit of extra time on, because there are 2 avenues I can see being worth assessing. First up is Copying Everywhere tokens. It's neat, especially since this makes us an instant speed rampant growth that gets the land untapped. But realistically, it's probably best if you're making token copies of things with stuff like Chronicle of Precedence. Now, we've yet to see these cloning spells work outside of golems, so red's probably not a great contender to try and make golems work, but maybe Thistral Charm can give us a reason to play clone effects outside of golem strategies. Maybe there's an artifact that's just waiting to get copied by Chronicle of Precedence, and now that we have Thistral Charm, it's finally worth giving that a shot. Ambassador of Unseen Edges is crazy strong for a 3-drop. A 1/4 fairy soldier with decoy that gives your other creatures +1/+0 and haste. What that means is that curving Ambassador on 3 into Teshima Living Balance on 4 lets you swing with Teshima and her tokens the turn you play them, as well as the Ambassador, stacking the decoy ability to resolve before Teshima's attack trigger. From there, each Ambassador gives the other +1 attack, while Teshima and her monks get +2 attack. Then when Teshima's trigger resolves, she has 3 power, so she puts 3 +1/+1 counters on both of the ambassadors and both of the monk tokens. For just a pair of 1/4 creatures on turns 3 and 4, that's 25 power swinging in. And yeah, while the mana to make Teshima happen on curve can be tricky, you just spend the first 2 turns sorting that out. And of course, this is all assuming your first 2 turns don't also come with some other things hitting the board. I think Ambassador has a real shot at bringing Teshima back after her nerf in June, and these 2 cards together are frightening. Secrets on Painted Wings and Uplifting Chorus are a pair of big 3-mana impulse draw tools asking you to go wide, but neither strikes me as being particularly worthwhile and constructed. Secrets is an enchantment, exiling cards from the top of your deck as 1 or more creatures hit a player, and you can play 1 card exile this way until end of turn, with the rest just going to the bottom when you don't. Does neat things with first strike separating triggers, but probably just isn't stellar. Uplifting Chorus is more immediate. You have to discard your hand for the value, but it's an instant that impulse draws for each creature you control and lets you play them until the end of your next turn. If you're low on cards or want things in your hand to go to the bin, this could be a solid refuel, but I feel like this is just asking for trouble. At the very least, your opponent doesn't get a chance to completely ruin this, because if your board gets cleared as you're trying to discard your hands to make a bunch of impulse draws, you can just choose not to discard your hand, but then that kind of just leaves you feeling like your chorus got counterspelled while your board got wiped, so still kind of rough. Here's our next villainy enchantment in Trickery. Usual cost gimmick, and whenever you attack, you create a token that's a copy of target attacking creature, except it's 1/1 that exiles at each of your end steps and isn't attacking. To get around this self-exiling token that's not made tapped and attacking, Trickery also comes with a clause preventing triggered abilities you control from causing you to sacrifice or exile creature tokens you control. Granted, if this gets picked off, say goodbye to each of the tokens it made, but at the very least, if it gets picked off at sorcery speed, you still get them until your next end step. There is potential for a very spicy combo here with Wildfang Cavalier and a Sacrifice Outlet. Cavalier's a 3/1 with haste for 3 that makes a 3/1 dinosaur token when it dies and gives your token haste. Importantly, if it dies during your combat phase, it then also gives you an additional combat phase this turn, intended to let you swing with the dinosaur immediately. Well, if you attack with Cavalier and have Trickery make a 1/1 token copy of it, that 1/1 won't be attacking, meaning if the Cavalier were to die in combat and give you another combat to go to, you can use that combat to swing with the 1/1 Cavalier token, which can then be copied to make a non-attacking token that gets to swing if this new one dies in combat. And of course, each time you make a 3/1 dinosaur with haste that can attack in one of these combats as well. Now, of course, the opponent can just choose not to block the Cavalier or kill it, but that's where a sack outlet like Soulflame Mystic comes in, sacrificing the Cavalier on combat damage so that the damage has been dealt, but you still get an extra combat. And of course, you can also be swinging in with the newest 3/1 dinosaur each time as well. Importantly, there is no free sack outlet for Cavalier right now, as the only thing that could work for this combo is Aushun's Presence, but that's actually shut off by the second ability of Trickery because it's a triggered ability asking you to sacrifice a creature. You'll need a repeatable activated ability to go infinite, and since Cavalier's extra combat step doesn't untap anything, the options are very limited. Even without going infinite, though, this is a lot of damage just on the first few combats, so maybe it'll do some spooky things. You can hold all of the dinosaurs back, and the moment you know you're going into your last combat, swing with all of them, and it's going to be a lot harder for your opponent to reasonably block a bunch of 3/1s all swinging at once. And even without doing this combo, I think Trickery still seems really cool. It's a big puzzle card that has a lot of cool things it can do that just require you to go tinker with it and solve it. Snow on Petals is the big double blue, double red 4-drop, a 4/4 demigod fairy with decoy that disables the legend rule for tokens you control, and much like Trickery, shuts down triggered abilities you control that try to sacrifice or exile your creature tokens. This snowballs out of control pretty well if left unchecked, but otherwise it's a lot more dependent on you running other things that make fleeting tokens. The biggest things I can think of here for both Snow on Petals and Trickery are Rain Dance, any sort of decayed token from Cliques of Nylon, whether they're the 2/2 minions from the Hazak Arsenal clique or token copies from Serve Again, some of the copy effects we mentioned back with Seed of the Golden Sun, and reliable Extraction Mission. I think of these, Mission is actually the most enticing, as it's a 5-mana spell when you're recurring Snow on Petals. You can make a token copy of Snow on Petals that can swing immediately, and the sack clause on Extraction Mission can be shut off by Snow on Petals, so you get to keep both in perpetuity. So if you're also in blue to give Mission Flash, this is 5 mana to get a pair of 4/4s in play on your opponent's turn, swing both of them on your next turn for 8. Actually, it becomes 10. You keep all 4 Snow on Petals in play because only one of them's not a token, and you just get to keep snowballing the board from there. Not the most game-warping Extraction Mission target, but keep in mind, the Snow on Petals tokens preserve the fact that your triggered abilities can't cause you to sacrifice or exile them. So the fact that they have the decoy clause to force them away is never going to matter. As long as they're in play, they'll be in play. And your 4/4 token off of Extraction Mission will always make sure it itself can't go away. So your opponent picking off the real deal Snow on Petals does not get rid of the 4/4 token. You'd think, for all of my excitement over some of these big go wide cards in blue and red, I'd be thrilled to have Blooming Wing out here making massive token boards. But if we're being realistic, I think this is actually a flicker card in disguise. She's a 5-mana 3/5 flyer that gets +1/+0 for each other attacking creature you control, which makes her very lethal in a pinch. But I think the big value I see here is that mass decoy granting, letting you spam a bunch of meaningful enters and potentially leave triggers. Things like the Rough Riders, Frog of Eternal Gloom, anything that gets you tempo when it enters is going to be great to swing in with when Blooming Wing's making you token copies of them. Spear of the Pale Thorn makes the list for my usual fixation on cost-reducing creatures, but I don't think this gets there. It's a 4/3 flyer for 6 that costs 1 less for each creature that attacked this turn, down to a minimum of 2. Could be cute if you give this flash, I guess, since it's not checking your creature specifically, but let's just move on. Mass Conjuration is the next in the reprint cycle and the second of the 2 from Magic Set Editor Modern. It's a 7-mana spell to make 2 copies of a creature you control, except it strips away legendary typing from them if it's present and gives them haste. There is not a single thing I could possibly imagine justifying you playing this in Constructed, but it's kind of funny. In its defense, I have thought about playing similar big blue, make multiple token copies of this thing of yours sorceries before, but that was because we had a creature that you cast them for a single blue mana while rebuying 2 spells when it entered back in, I believe, Blood Like Rivers. And even with all of that, that deck sucked. So probably safe to write this one off unless MSCM folks have experience in making this thing work. Oh, and you thought my cost reduction fixation was cured? No. Let's talk about Towering Aspen. He's a 5 blue and red, 5/4 legendary fairy noble that costs 1 less for each token you control. So he's really a 2-drop. He has haste, and whenever he attacks, you can copy another token you control, or have a token become a copy of a creature you control permanently, even letting you add it to the suite of attackers without that token becoming tapped. And again, it's permanently that new creature. Now, we talked about some neat blue token makers back with Hushed Briefing, and while I absolutely think that these want to be in the same deck, I think that means we should really take some time to talk about what red brings to this category. We have Puzzle Box tokens from Fabricated Anomaly. We have Groove Surfer spitting out boost tokens on every non-creature spell. We have Soldier tokens from Sparks of Revolution, and a bunch of new mass token generation from things like Gospel of Dominion. Listen, I don't think the blue-red tokens deck will be anywhere near the most powerful strategy in the new field, but with cards like Hushed Breathing and Towering Aspen really fighting to leverage mass token boards for a lot of cost efficiency, I couldn't be more intrigued. Also, think about it this way. Your Everywhere lands make this cost less, and it makes Everywhere lands when it attacks if you have them. Like your Everywhere lands effectively double cost reduce because they're lands you didn't have to play to use to cast this while also cost reducing it. It's really good. They're really good. This card's really good. Play Towering Aspen. Please, I beg of you. Play blue-red tokens. If I can't, I beg of you, do it for me. This card's really sweet. The archetype's really sweet. I fell off script. I love this card so much. It's one of my favorite cards in the set. And I also really love Hushed Briefing. They're both really cool. Moving on. Back to the script. Let's kick off black-green with one of our biggest new bits of spice here, another 2-mana Planeswalker, but it's never actually being put into play as a Planeswalker for 2. She's Anik Oathbound, a 1/3 human shaman for 1 and a green, and whenever another creature you control enters while she's in play, you gain 1 life. All right, moving on. No. If she's in your graveyard and you've gained or lost life this turn, you can cast her transformed for 2 a black and a green as Devika Severed, a 3 loyalty planeswalker with a +1, -1, and -6 ability. Her +1's simple enough, making that familiar, kinda underwhelming 2/2 zombie that can't block, and gaining you 2 life. Her -1 has target player sacrifice a non-land permanent, causing Devika to phase out. Interesting that it says Devika on the backside, but the text says Anik. I'm gonna have to point that out in the bugs channel. Causing her to phase out if they sacrifice something with mana value 2 or less. Finally, her -6, which gives you an emblem allowing you to gain life whenever your opponent loses life, also just makes your opponent lose 5, meaning you immediately gain 5. Anik and Davika are a lot of value packed into a pretty unassuming package, especially when you consider that Davika being destroyed just opens up the familiar hoop of have your life total change to cast Davika from your graveyard again. With this being a 2-drop, you can find it with Ozon's Blessing. Your Coalesced Lands and Shocklands help you cast Davika from your graveyard, and there are plenty of other familiar tools to get the card in your bin or help you cast it with things like Inklight Duelist, Jack Monster Mentor. Anik and Davika is a very exciting mid-range tool to fight through the long game, even if there is a huge weakness here in that +1 doing nothing to protect you or her. Also worth remembering, if you have Anik in play, if you have Davika in play, a copy of Anik in your hand can be put onto the battlefield. And if you already have an Anik in play, you can play the one in your hand to legend rule the one that you just played, gain 1 life from the Anik that you had in play, and then immediately cast it back as Davika for 4 mana, functionally spending 6 mana for Davika if you didn't have one in your graveyard, because the legend rule is really good when cards can have multiple faces. Legends that are able to be fine in multiples are always really nice. Cruxborn Tyrant's a 2/2 flying demon cleric for 2, with a trigger at your end step to have each opponent lose 1 life if you gained life in the turn. It also makes a 1/1 spirit if you gained at least 3, and it regrows a card if you gained at least 9. Unfortunately, this end step trigger isn't an intervening if, so life gain triggers that go off on your end step will still work with the Tyrant here. I think it's actually a decent enough creature if you can get incidental life gain in your black-green aggro strategy, but it could also be a nice mid-range tool with planeswalkers like Celise, whose passive trigger guarantees you a spirit if it goes off, or Sinido, whose 0 can give this +2/+2 in lifelink, or whose -3 can reward all of your aggressive life payment by equalizing your life total with the opponent's, possibly hitting that 9 or more life gained in a turn threshold. I think it's a neat card with a tricky hoop to line up, and I think the goal for this to make it into your deck should be that it's making spirit tokens reliably, and if it is, that's pretty huge. Like, this doesn't need to ever regrow anything, and if you can regrow something, not only are you seemingly padding your life total by a lot, this is also just gonna be sitting comfortably making you a lot of value. I really like Cruxborn Tyrant. It's simple, but effective. Dual Cairn Charm is in contention with Thistral Charm as the strongest of the cycle. It's a 2-mana instant, as always, with 3 modes to choose from, allowing you to either return a creature or land card from your graveyard to your hand, exile a creature or planeswalker with mana value 2 or less, or have each opponent lose 3 life while you gain 3 life. It's a solid set of flexible options for a more aggressive-leaning strategy, either clearing the path for your board with the removal mode, or getting some reach over the finish line with the drain mode, while having a value option as the third option. It'll be decent in slower decks as well, where the drain and recursion modes likely flip in terms of importance, but the fact that all 3 modes can reliably be things you care about in almost any build is really nice. And hey, this gets Vigor online in a pinch. Revivified Wrath is really exciting on the surface, but the timing is the one thing giving me second thoughts. It's a 2-mana sorcery that destroys a non-land permanent, with the catch that you have to pay either 3 life or an extra 2 mana to make it happen. If you have other things that reward you for losing life, like Anik or other Vigor effects, it can be pretty reliable as a way to enable those while just picking off whatever most troubles you. But when you compare it to something like Creation's Combustion, which has more avenues for synergy and is done at instant speed, I start to lose faith in Revivified Wrath a lot. Path of the Gentle End is a 3-mana enchantment that lets you look at cards from the top of your library equal to the life you've lost on each of your end steps, putting one of those cards into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your deck. Say it with me, Shocklands and Coalesced Lands are really, really good. This becomes a really free include in any slower deck that wants to play these Vigor synergies, because this kind of just gets to be a Phyrexian Arena at your end step. You'll lose 1 life during your turn rather than at the end of your turn, and then Path of the Gentle End rewards you by drawing you a card if you've only lost 1 life, or giving you card selection as you pay more life in turns. And yeah, Phyrexian Arena at your end step instead of your draw step is a big, big buff. Or rather upkeep over draw step, just because there's immediacy to it. Your opponent has to answer this the turn you play it before you get to your end step, or else you just get the value before they can stop it. And even if it's just replacing itself, that's great, because your opponent's then investing a resource to get rid of it. I think it's slow, but I kind of love it if you're on a slower black-green Vigor plan. The next villainy cycle enchantment to show up is Anthropomancy. And the usual casting cost setup for this lets you take your draw step to peek at the top 2 cards of your library after you draw, letting you pay 4 life for each of the ones that you want to draw, and forcing the ones that you don't pay life for into your graveyard. From there, it just gets a trigger to gain you 1 life whenever one of your creatures dies. I'm not quite sure what the right home for this is, but it's a pretty spooky draw engine if you can make the 8 life you pay every turn not somehow rush you to death. To my knowledge, while regarded as a profoundly powerful card in a vacuum, Sylvan Library has struggled to ever be particularly constructed playable, and this does look rough in the face of burn and token aggro. But maybe there are things I'm just not seeing. We'll have to wait and find out if someone cracks the code on this one. Soul Hoarder is a simple one. 3/2 Trampling Spirit for 3 that gets a counter on your end step if Vigor's online. Coalesced lands, shocklands, yada yada, you get the gist. I'm not sure this is actually worthwhile in the Vigor aggro plan since it's a tad slow, but it's almost always swinging for 4 the turn after you play it, and its scaling from there is at least nice enough. It's just probably really awful if you don't curve out to it. And even then, there are probably Vigor creatures that are cheaper that you'd rather play in multiples on turn 3 rather than just running out this. Orith Cross Crusader is another unassuming one, 4/4 Trampling Spirit Knight for 4 that gains you 4 life when it enters. Less of a Vigor enabler and much more of an alright mid-range tool if you need the immediate life gain, but you're probably just better off reaching for Life Hacker if you actually think you need this. Culling Ritual is a solid member of the non-creature reprint cycle, a 4-mana sorcery that destroys each non-land permanent with mana value 2 or less and gives you a black or green mana for each thing you blow up. Obviously, if there is a lot of low mana value cards floating around, or if you just want to nuke decks like White-Black Hardsuit out of existence, this is a pretty good way of doing so. But I'm more interested in its application as a combo tool. See, your gut instinct might be to say that blowing up all of your berry tokens feels pretty bad, and that's fair, but consider that the primary way of having a ton of berry tokens get sacrificed, like it used to back in January, isn't really how the deck is able to win anymore because the ways of sacrificing them all have gotten way worse. So what if instead of finding a way to sacrifice all of your trinket tokens, you just turn them all into banked mana for Culling Ritual? I'm still not quite sure what the end goal here should be, but I've missed playing with berries since my time with them in January, and while there's a lot of new anti-artifact hate to really make this plan a gamble, it would be cool to give them a new lease on life. Vardo Ravelon is a tricky one to sort out, but I think I know of a few clean tools to make it hum. He's a 4-mana 8/6 demigod zombie, but you can't cast him unless your starting life total is unless your life total is 5 or more than your starting life total, or less than half of it. So 25 and up or 9 and below in traditional constructed. From there, he makes each opponent sacrifice a non-land permanent whenever he enters or dies, and you can pay 4 and discard 2 cards to return him from your graveyard to your hand. That casting restriction is pretty rough, so let's just cheat it. In escalating order of viability, you can reanimate him with Dark Horse Victory, courtesy of that recursive activated ability. You can pay 2 mana into the X cost of Bind Life and Steel to include him in that big recursion effect. You could pay 3 black and a red to extraction mission him out while getting a token copy that enters and dies immediately to the legend rule for 3 edicts all in one. Or probably my favorite, you can sacrifice another 4-drop to Garen's -1, putting him in play from your graveyard, and then use Garen's -1 from there to just sacrifice and return him each turn thereafter. I think Vardo does actually do some pretty sweet things, and it's not outside the realm of possibility that you could just hard cast him, either with your usual lands or other sources of pain putting you down to 9 life, or with a couple good life gain cards like Anik putting you above 25. Sirius Bound to Dusk's the black-green double-cost creature, a 5/5 legendary spirit warrior with ward pay 3 life, and a pair of replacement effects modifying how you gain and lose life. It amplifies your life gain by 2, and nullifies the life you lose without paying back down by 2 as well. So something like Anik will gain you 3 life per trigger, while something like Vardo's Scalpel or opposing 2 damage burn doesn't actually move the needle on your life total at all. While there are a few things that can synergize with this, like Scalpel or Cryptology, honestly this just seems like an annoying way to shut the door on aggressive strategies and absolutely bolster your life total with life gain triggers. when a lot of incidental damage just kind of fizzles away, this starts looking really great. Now, importantly, this does get awkward against multiple attackers, as if I understand correctly, if you're getting hit by a swarm of 1/1s, all of that damage is dealt collectively, meaning the first 2 points of damage are negated, but everything else still gets through. Then again, with this being also a life gain amplifier, it's a nice survivability tool when you have a bunch of small 1-point life gain triggers. Of course, if you have a way to reduce the damage you're taking prior to this folding in, that I believe will also interact favorably. So Sirius could just be a stellar survivability tool. Bogspawn Witness is a big, mid-rangey Vigor payoff, a 4/4 Frog Spirit for 5 that gives you a modal end-step trigger if Vigor is active, and forces you to choose both if you've had both halves of Vigor active this turn. First mode makes each opponent sacrifice a creature or planeswalker unless they discard a card, while the second mode regrows a creature or planeswalker from your graveyard to your hand. Inner Ring's Pupil is a really solid hand attack and edict effect, but always having to attack in with it can be awkward against larger boards, while Spiky Jack's Gravetiller is an awesome potential recursive tool with the exact same problem. Witness carries the same role as both, maybe a little less effectively, without you having to swing in, and all it asks is that you run Anik, a couple other life gain cards, and the usual suite of Pain lands. It's going to be really solid. A similarly great mid-range Vigor payoff, Zakola, the Gentle End, is a 5-mana 3/5 legendary spider zombie with reach. And at your end step, you can search up a creature or land card with mana value less than or equal to the life you've lost in the turn, and put that card right onto the battlefield. If you shocked in a land untapped this turn, or tapped 2 coalesced lands to put this into play, this finds your Anik immediately. And even if you're not paying any life in a turn, this goes and finds a land and puts it directly into play at your end step. This seems really strong, and I think it's one of the best reasons to push your Vigor deck towards the slower end of the scale. One last black-green card to discuss, and of course it's gotta be a cost-reducing big lad. Don't worry, it's the last one in this particular review. It's a 4/4 dragon zombie with flying, vigilance, and menace for 6, a black, and a green that costs 1 less to cast for each 1 life you've gained or lost in a turn. If you can gain 2 life and pay 4, this costs 2 mana, which is a pretty sweet negotiation for a decently sized body with so many keywords. You can expect me to try and figure out the right configuration for this in due time, but I ultimately can't decide if this is better for Vigor aggro or Vigor mid-range. Testing will clear this up a lot, and I intend to test this out a lot. Rejuvenation gains you 8 life and looks at the top 8 cards with this in play, and that's a pretty good deal. Bloodied Zealot kicks off red and white, the last multicolor pairing, as a 2/2 for 2 Azure Berserker that lets you sacrifice a creature when it attacks to deal 2 to each opponent and gain you 2 life. We already had something very similar in the pool with Aushun's Presence, which doesn't require itself to be exposed in combat, and has seen a tiny fringe bit of play if my memory is correct, but I don't think this is going to turn things around in any major way. Our final charm, Sunwrath Charm, is a red and a white for another instant with 3 modes. You can discard a card to draw 2, reanimate a creature with mana value 2 or less, or deal 2 damage to an attacking or blocking creature while gaining 2 life. I think it's pretty solid. Not quite to the level of Sidraith Charm or Thistral Charm, but as Ozon's Blessing has proven increasingly as of late, having ways to get your 2 mana value creatures into play at instant speed is pretty good, and this is a new way to do so when those 2-drops get kicked off the board for the first time. Decent card filtering and removal utility, I could totally see this getting tried out here and there. Okay, we have to talk about balls again. For the uninitiated, balls is the go-to name for the deck comprised entirely of cheap, high-power aggressive creatures that self-sacrifice and usually come with trample and haste, as well as cheap spells that revive them to be used more and more burn damage. So named for the original Magic card Ball Lightning that inspires so many of these designs. Bloodhorn Ravager is our first hint that white could be worth including in this strategy, as a white and double red 4/1 Minotaur Berserker with trample, haste, and lifelink, as well as that familiar end-step sacrifice clause. It also has Rapture, meaning the first time it dies, it comes right back as another 4/1 that only knows violence. While black has traditionally been the color you want to play alongside this, thanks to Extraction Mission, Stain Strokes, and a black-red 3-mana 6/6 menacing creature with really good combat damage trigger, from Kitsuo Dusk of Time, to my knowledge, the black-red build hasn't really seen much success or even play in the last 4 months because it's just not quite there. Now, not only are we getting Ravager as an excuse to play white alongside Expendable Arsonist and Fukurok Defector, we're also getting Thorn and Trial and Too Late for Grace as a new pair of Unearth effects in white. I think red-white balls may be the new way to build it, and I do not look forward to having to talk about balls on the next decklist stream. But I know one of you sickos is gonna make me do it anyways. Anon, Thief of the Sun, is another tricky one for me. A 3/2 Demigod Cleric for 3 with Ward, Sacrifice a non-land permanent, and Rapture. Anon also has an attack trigger, giving your other attacking creatures that lack haze counters Rapture until end of turn. There's fun things you can do with removing the haze counters from your creatures to have this be able to give them Rapture a second time, but realistically, this is probably just a 2-of in the balls deck, giving your Expendable Arsonists and Vukorok Defectors a chance to swing in, gain Rapture, and come back the first time they die. If there are other bigger applications, I'll be keen to see how they pan out, but as it stands, I don't expect too much else from this one. Deafening Clarion is the last of the big reprint cycle, and it's a big one. A 3-mana sorcery with 2 modes that lets you choose to either do one or both, the first mode doing 3 damage to each creature, and the second giving your creatures lifelink for the turn. Coup d'etat is already a bit of a big deal right now with how relevant 3 toughness has felt lately, and while it's not seeing a ton of play due to the color restriction, Deafening Clarion is a far more flexible spell on colors that also has a chance to gain you a bit of life if your board can survive it. This will see play, no doubt about it. We'll just have to wait and see what kind of decks in red and white take things slow enough to give this a home. Rite of Consuming Glory is a simple and strong removal spell, exiling an artifact and an enchantment for 3 mana at instant speed. If you care about this at all, you'll probably be happy for the occasional 2 for 1. Good stuff. Vow to Conquer is a little less exciting, but could still be decent. It's a 3 mana for an instant that can't be countered, deals 3 damage to any target, and gains you 3 life. I think Lightning Helix would see play in this format, but I'm not so sure you're willing to pay an extra mana to make it uncounterable in most cases. Divinity is our final Villainy Cycle enchantment, and it's really close to playable, but not so amazing that I want to call it astonishing by any measure. It's 3 mana for an enchantment that deals 1 to each opponent and gains you 1 life whenever a creature you control enters. From there, you make a 1/1 red Berserker at your end step if 2 or more tokens died under your control that turn. The big synergy here is with fleeting tokens that aren't decoys, so they sacrifice instead of exiling. Importantly, this means Clash at Scorchroot Bluff, which both deals 2 to the opponent and gains you 2 when you go to combat with Divinity in play, and then makes 1/1 at your end step if those fairies head out the door from being sacrificed, and if they die in combat, you still get to have 2 creatures die. The big thing that makes Divinity consistent with Clash is just that Divinity is not an intervening if clause. That end step trigger doesn't care about if they died on your end step, just cares about if they died in the turn. Or rather, before your end step. So, yeah, these could be really good together. Jury's just out on what other cards these would want to exist alongside. Maybe this is how you pivot your Revolt of the Palace decks, with having these as your like big top-end 3-drops, and you just play a bunch of cheap token generation effects. Siphoned Allegiance is a decent token spell. You make 3 1/1s for 4 as a sorcery, and you give them haste. Probably won't see play, but it's neat. Esdrin the Unburned is our final double-pipped 4-drop. A 4/3 legendary human berserker with haste with a really solid attack trigger, reanimating a creature card from your graveyard to play tapped and attacking with a finality counter on it, only if the creature you choose has mana value less than or equal to the number of attacking creatures. As always, finality is really awkward, especially with Rapture, but I think Rapture's just awkward with this anyways. I'm not sure what deck wants this, but I have to imagine that it's just worthwhile as a lot of pressure for a 4-drop, right? Helping to make all those haze and finality counters be less of a liability is our final Planeswalker, Amaret, Seeker of the Sun, who we haven't seen since their first appearance in Secrets of the River Cities, at least for this format. They're a 5-mana 5 loyalty Planeswalker that upticks by 2 to exile up to 2 target creatures you control, returning them to play tapped and attacking at your next Declare Attacker step. Their 0 makes them a 4/4 angel with flying, lifelink, haste, and indestructible for the turn, and their -2 deals 3 to any target while gaining you 3 life. Just those last 2 abilities by themselves make this a pretty appealing mid-range and control finisher, but it's that uptick I really want to look at here. Folks who know me really well will probably know that one of my most loathed cards in the format's history, which should not say rotating here, it should say rotated because it rotated last September. My opinion of this card makes my thoughts of Chronicle Extinction look tame. Is a card called In Search of Peace, an ironic name for a very tilting control tool. See, when ISOP was in play, you could cast a spell to flicker out another permanent you control, returning them to play at the next end step. But importantly, the flickers in Blood Like Rivers returned the exiled card to your control regardless of who owns them, meaning theft effects just kept your opponent's things forever. In case you didn't hear me right, you could cast Conscript, steal your opponent's 1 and 3 drop, and then keep them for good by just casting 2 spells. And guess what? Amaret does it too. Amaret's +2 exiles up to 2 target creatures, brings them back tapped and attacking at your next declare attacker step, doesn't say under their owner's control, meaning you steal creatures with Conscript, uptick Amaret's targeting both of them, and then you get both forever, and they're attacking your opponent immediately. Even without this interaction, Amaret is really strong, but with this in mind, I'm just dreading this. In Search of Peace was my least favorite card in the format when people started playing it with theft effects. Split Moon, who made Conscript and made Cyberos, actually, broke my soul with this interaction. I took a break from playing Rev pretty early into Cyberos rotation because of this interaction just completely eroding my will to play this format. It did eventually get changed. In Search of Peace did eventually stop stealing control of the things. Then it got put back to doing it when it rotated. I don't want to go off on a whole rant about In Search of Peace, but it's crazy to me that this got reverted when Blood Like Rivers rotated. It was one of the most irritating cards in the format. And it's such a shame because I love flicker effects and I would love to play In Search of Peace, and I just wish that the most viable way to play this wasn't steal your opponent's best cards and then play them for them, and you don't actually have to spend mana on any of your opponent's cards. They're spending the mana and you just get to steal them and play them forever. It's so frustrating. Search for peace, not the card. I'm searching for peace, internal peace right now. Don't think about the card. I fell off script. I don't like this card at all. It scares me that Amaret does something so similar. They're a cool character. The card's really strong outside of this interaction. I love this card outside of this interaction, but much like with In Search of Peace, the ability to just permanently steal all of your opponent's hard work is instilling me with so much dread. Let's move on. Our final multicolor card of the set is Asterion, Architect of War, a 5-mana 6/6 legendary demon cleric that can't be countered, has a crazy high ward cost of 3 mana and 3 life, and at combat on your turn it makes a trio of 1/1s with haste that sacrifice the next end step. See, this is what Divinity is looking for. End step sacrificing tokens from a card that just spits out a ton every turn. Even beyond Divinity, Asterion is a profoundly hard to interact with threat at 5 mana. Slipping through the stack with ease, and being nigh untouchable for any reasonable targeted removal spell due to that ward cost. This thing just sits in play and stares at your opponent while you fling a bunch of fleeting 1/1s at them turn by turn, knowing full well that there is very little they can do without spending their whole turn picking it off, or having the perfect board wipe to clear a 6 toughness creature. Keep in mind, a lot of the good black board wipes we have right now are things like Damn to Hell, which has to target this, and things like the board wipes we've talked about in this set. And the 4 mana -3/3 only goes up to 5/5, which doesn't kill this. God, this thing's a house. We're on Colorless at last. Crucible of the Burning Sun is a nice 2-mana tech artifact against sacrificing graveyard decks, forcing cards and tokens that would be put into graveyards into exile instead. From there, you can have a player exile a card from their graveyard at your end step, scrying 1 if they can't. Solid utility, shuts down death triggers, and plenty of key value engines. Seems like a safe sideboard staple moving forward. Golden Bloom of the Silence is another sweet 2-mana tech artifact, and this is the thing I was talking about way back with the red 2/1 sacrifice outlet, because this is what I mean when I say having consistency across multiple card names that do very similar things. It's 2-mana legendary artifact. It'll enter, shut off a non-land card of your choice, removing all abilities from permanents with the chosen name. Other permanents, importantly, so it can't name itself and shut itself off. If there's a particular tool you'll need to disable, this gets the job done, and even in a pinch, you can play this to turn your opponent's bloom off, which is especially cool because the opponent can't then just legend rule theirs to change the card they're naming, since it doesn't free their bloom from yours being able to turn it off. So, yeah, this is a pretty solid. This is the kind of solid tech card that is good against other people playing the solid tech card. It's really cool. The Forever Heart's a decent 3-mana rock, tapping for mana of any color, letting you discard cards with equal or greater mana value when creatures you control, to creatures you control as they die. If you discard a card with equal or greater mana value to a dying creature, you get to return the dying creature to play with a finality counter. I'm sure there are some decent ways to make this hum. I saw a little bit of chatter about it, but I think a lot of this is just escaping my mind. I don't know if you really want to play a 3-mana mana rock for this. So I'll let you all tell me if this thing is really good. My brain just shuts off every time I read the words finality counter at this point. The Throne of House Ravalon is an interesting 3-mana legendary artifact, and yet another anthem, though this one's contingent on you controlling a legendary creature. Granted, if you have a legendary creature, this also draws you a card at your end step, which makes it really worthwhile to go through the hoop of having it online. And you can sacrifice it for 3 mana to return a legendary card from your graveyard to your hand, meaning if you draw this in multiples, they aren't completely useless. I think this most wants to be in decks where you're jamming a lot of cheap legends, so things like Melon and Jorgen are probably a must, but this is pretty strong when it's online, so I think it's probably worthwhile. It's just a shame that this is the same spot on the curve as AO, because this would be a super sweet card for tokens otherwise, but a lot of the best token cards are already on the 3-mana slot. Thorn of Azurite is our last non-legendary artifact, as a 3-cost clue that makes non-creature spells cost 1 more to cast, and can be sacrificed for 2 to exile each opponent's graveyard and draw a card. The graveyard hate clause is probably pretty unimportant, but the mana tax can be pretty sweet in a deck that's otherwise all in on creatures. Remnant of the Devoured Sun is a tricky card to line up, but it could be amazing if you can enable it quickly. It's a 5-mana indestructible 7/7 legendary horror, but you must exile 7 cards from your graveyard to cast it. Whenever it enters or attacks, you return a card of your choice exiled with it to your hand, and if that card's a permanent with mana value less than the number of cards in your hand when that triggers, you just can put it in play instead. Repeatable mill effects are few and far between right now, but with things like Root Fossil, Reaper of Blossoms, and Eager Scavenger lining your graveyard, casting Remnant on curve isn't beyond the realm of reason, and it's a phenomenal payoff if you can get it online due to how tricky it is to remove and how much value you get over time while your opponent scrambles for an answer. I don't know if this has a clear defined home, but it'll be fun to test out. Lastly, we have Heart of the Shed Soul, a 5-mana legendary artifact that draws you a card and loses you 1 life at your upkeep, and can save you from losing the game by exiling itself alongside all cards in your hand and all non-land permanents on your battlefield. If it exiles at least 9 cards this way, 8 including itself, it sets your life total to 3 to buy you a bit of time and an extra turn potentially. While my initial reaction was that this just sucks, there are actually some nice ways to get around that drawback of the game-saving exile, namely by hiding card draw, creatures, and life gain in your mana base. The best card draw land I can find is Lorespire Bluff, so that's probably not a real answer to the problem. But Stack Conviviplex, being both a creature you can animate after this saves you, and being a creature you can just have online that doesn't get exiled by Heart, gives you a real bit of sustainability. Do I think this becomes a must-include in mono-white control? Maybe. I could see trying 1 or 2 of these in decks that want a full set of Conviviplexes, but I'm not sure the card is so amazing as to necessitate it. Those white control decks could use a good draw engine on the later side of things, though, so maybe this is exactly what the deck needs. Though, as I mentioned a lot earlier, with Fall of Volantin taking away the strategy's best board wipe, there's no guarantee that mono-white control even survives rotation. And that, at long last, concludes our comprehensive review of Exalts of Twiltrie. As always, check out all of the links in the description below if you want to do your own dive through the format and what we're gaining. And be sure to check out the Revolution Custom Magic chat in the Custom Magic the Gathering Discord server, also in the description. In the meantime, take care of yourself. I'm finally going to go take care of myself, and I'll see you all in the Revolution chat. Bye-bye.